Absolutely. I've always said, if ever I found I got a fan letter from someone who is like ideologically conservative, who enjoyed my work, it would shake me.
I mean, I'd be all right if they enjoyed it as long as it also pissed them off. I think that would be okay.
That's fine. And you know, there is that whole thing of like, you know, not to be too snooty, but like the right generally misunderstanding media in general. But that would make me stop and pause.
Be a little nervous.
Look at myself, you know, and what I was doing. Fortunately, it hasn't happened yet. So, you know.
It's interesting you say that, because I know what you're saying. I have actually. There are a couple of times when I've had, you know, I've had commentaries or reviews of my work, and I thought, oh, blimey, I don't think that's what I was going for. You know what I mean? I've had that happen a couple of times, interestingly.
And that's fine, because that happens. You know, that doesn't bother me when it's just like an interpretation that I never considered. That's absolutely fine. But if someone who is of like a conservative bent feels reinforced in their ideology, then or their perspectives, then it's like, oh God, I've done it wrong. Oh, I've made a monster. I am Victor Frankenstein.
That's when you got to like Stephen King with Rage, right? You're like, right, well, this fucker's not going to see print again. Fuck you guys.
It's really interesting with King, isn't it? Because like of course, he's been writing for such a long time that he's gone through so many different phases that you can see different types of King, different incarnations of King through his writing. So sometimes, some of his younger stuff, sometimes he does get a little bit reactionary. Occasionally.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's I think interestingly, it's a kind of liberal reactionary.
Yes,
specifically. I mean, I always think the Running Man's really fascinating for that. Because the Running Man, I mean, it's a weird thing, the Running Man. I mean, it's obviously the novel is or novella is immensely superior to the Arnie movie. But
although I do have a soft spot for that.
Oh yeah, I don't hate
the absurdity of it.
Yeah. But it's a totally different animal, right?
Yeah, it's like, it is so far removed. It's a bit like Total Recall and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's that kind of distance, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big old gap. It's a big old gap. But at the same time, I think you can see, when you read the novella, you can see the roots of the movie in it, weirdly. And it's not just in the kind of, obviously the game show stuff is very much there, and that's kind of, I mean, that's the bit that gets pulled across, right? But also for me, in the kind of, there is a kind of macho quality to the lead, you know, to the main character, and the way he goes through the story, the way he goes through the narrative.
It's also, I mean, it's the human characters as well, like the way humanity is responding to these games. There is a kind of slightly to the right of center reactionary quality to the way he portrays humanity in that story, in the sense that they totally buy into it. They turn on one another, you know. And you get a similar thing in a lot of stories from that era. I mean, the Mist has it too.
Yeah, the Mist definitely. I'm glad you mentioned that.
It really does. And I did notice it this time. I really noticed it this time for some reason. I don't know why, but it really popped to me this time.
So this is I was thinking about this today as I was watching the movie version again. It's so fucking good.
So good, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. I genuinely, and I loved it, but I had forgotten how good it was. I genuinely had going back to it. I was like, holy shit.
Darabont, somehow, he is like Jackson and Tolkien, isn't it? You know, he gets King.
He's the King Whisperer.
He so is, right? You know, originally he was attached to the Dark Tower as well.
Oh, I mean, don't make
this was, I know. This was way back in the early 2000s when it was like bouncing around development hell.
Sure, yeah.
And he was attached to it, Darabont and Guillermo del Toro. They were both going to do it together early on. God. And can you imagine what that would have been like?
You just if you didn't have enough reasons to hate Hollywood already, there it is right there. Why would you let that not happen?
And then we got
you do that? You know, which I absolutely don't hate. I mean, it's funny. I caught it on telly the other night again, and I was channel hopping, and it was the scene where they're attacking the camp and they're kidnapping Jake, and I think Roland's recovering, right? Because he's been poisoned and he's recovering. But you know what? That moment when he just closes his eyes and you can see the way they're filming, like he's just tuning in with his ears in this impossible way.
Yeah.
And then he just points, he's not even looking, he points the gun and pulls the trigger, and then like half a mile away, the guy carrying Jake just falls over. I was like, you know what? That was fucking Roland. That was really, really cool. That was, you know, and the movie has those moments. If you treat the movie that did get made not as the movie version of The Dark Tower, but actually as a coda to the novel series, if you treat it as the end game of what happens, I mean, spoilers for The Dark Tower, I guess. But if you treat it as the next cycle or the cycle after what happened, because he's got the horn, right?
Yes, he's got the horn. So this must be after, right? So this must be after.
And I think as a coda, it's kind of cute. It's kind of okay. I mean, McConaughey's great, I think.
McConaughey, I mean, for me, the cast sells it. I think McConaughey and Idris are just phenomenal. They are absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely fine. I just don't think it was the tour de force that people wanted from
No,
this
it certainly
series,
wasn't.
you know.
Well, it wasn't because it wasn't the movie of The Dark Tower. It was a coda sequel thing. And as that, it's absolutely fine. But
I mean, I don't envy anyone. And Flanagan's got it, hasn't he, by all accounts?
Right.
Flanagan is going to do it. And almost anyone else, I'd be, you know what, this is a waste of time. This is not going to work. But Flanagan actually has a very similar quality in his work to the books of The Dark Tower. You know, all of that symbolism and whatnot. That is very Flanagan. And if anyone can do it, I think he can.
Yeah, so, I mean, the interconnectedness, right, and the hooking together of things.
Yeah.
That's
hard to communicate. How do you do that without diving deep into exposition? Because in books, obviously, there's all this really weird symbolic stuff about the number 19 and certain times and places and years, the rose, the tower, the horn, the turtle, the bear, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Very hard to communicate.
I mean, that's true. It is worth remembering that certainly when it comes to the Gunslinger, the first book in the series, you know, King did go back and heavily rewrite that book. He did. Glue a lot, like, because I read the original Gunslinger, the original. I don't have it anymore, but the original textbook when I was 19, funnily enough. And
that's a nice bit of serendipity.
Yeah, there you go. And it was a very different. I mean, it's a different animal now, but it was honestly very different.
Read that next to what King was writing and publishing at the time, and it's like a different author. He shifts the way he writes in such a chameleonic way. I don't think if you didn't know any better, you wouldn't know that was King. You wouldn't.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing about early King, isn't it? Because, you know, a lot of the earliest King stuff actually ended up getting published under the Bachman name, right?
Yes, of course.
Because Rage is super early. I think the Running Man's pretty early.
I remember reading that. The Running Man's a very early idea, isn't it? And the Gunslinger's he put away for years, didn't he?
He says in the intro that he wrote that when he was 19.
Bloody hell. Jesus Christ.
The original version, the original draft of that. So I think that's the same time he was writing, just for, you know, context, that's the same time he was writing The Raft, you know, which is, again, one of his earliest short stories. And the first version of The Mist was, what was that? I was just reading 76, 77, something like that. The one that went into Dark Forces, which is a much shorter version than the.
It's a very different version, isn't it?
Yeah.
Than the big version you get in Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, the novella that opens Skeleton Crew, which is
now, of course, generally published on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Mist has got it's become so iconic that it's now its own beastie.
Well, I mean, I think that's partly a symbol of the kind of, we've talked about this a lot on other shows for other reasons, but the rebirth of the novella as a viable publishing entity, thanks to the addition, the existence of e-readers, right?
Of course.
Novellas are kind of prohibitively expensive to publish in a print form without having to charge so much that people don't want to buy them. But suddenly, when you can buy it for $2.99 on the Kindle, then it becomes a viable form again. Nothing, it's not an issue. It's never been an issue with the storytelling form. It's always been a fantastic way, especially for horror stories, to be told. I think the novellas are a wonderful way of telling a horror story. But
they have that wonderful truncated quality, don't they? That narrowness, the immediacy. I do love a good novella. Don't get me wrong. I do like some of the weightier tomes as well.
Sure.
But I do love a good novella.
No, me too. I think it's. I don't think it's the ideal form for horror, but I think it's an ideal form for horror, if that makes sense.
And certain types of horror, obviously, certain types like this one, it's perfect where you do have just this.
Because it's all filler, no filler. You can't afford to fuck about. Same with a short story. You've got to be relentless with your pacing. And you can just drive to the end as fast as you can and then just stop.
This bloody does, doesn't it? I mean, it's like it's just one through line, isn't it? It is one through line, and that's it. Which again is kind of unusual for King. He does tend to hop about quite a lot. You tend to have a big old raft of characters, and you do tend to have different parties doing different things. And
I think it's really interesting that this one is an early one, because I think actually his early work did tend to be more focused. He did more first-person work early on as well. I'm thinking again about Rage in particular, which I know again he was very young when he wrote that. But I think there's something. There's something very immediate about that era of his writing. The Gunslinger as well, actually, although that's not first person, but the energy, especially of the original text of the Gunslinger, if you've ever read it, like it does have that. There's a ferocity to it, a real kind of fury, a real kind of and a kind of determined ugliness too, and a determinedness to point at ugliness and to say ugly things. Sometimes there's all kinds of. I mean, I'm thinking about the Gunslinger now, but there's a scene I remember where he's Roland's outside a farmhouse, and he describes the farmer's daughter as essentially like this imbecilic creature with a very full female adult form.
Yes,
and it's like it's really disturbing. It really is like, and I don't mean
something
like
about
as
the world that he paints, isn't it? Like there is this sense of it. It's a very bizarrely, there's a really almost like Dark Souls sense about the Gunslinger, where he is determined to give you this impression of a world breaking down, of like, and it's not just like, it's not physically breaking down, although it's metaphysically breaking down. Exactly. Everything is corroding and becoming uglier around the Gunslinger, and the Gunslinger himself, of course, you do although I don't think the Gunslinger itself ever states it, but you do get this sense of him as being interdimensional, as though he's wandered planes of existence as well as physical realms like deserts and wastelands.
I mean, you get the impression that the deserts and the wastelands have been inner as well as outer, don't you? And you get the impression that perhaps partly because of who he's pursuing, right? That of necessity he's experienced things that most of us won't ever. There's already a sense of the immortal about him, isn't there, in that first volume?
Absolutely.
And but I think for me, I mean, you're right about the sense of decay. It plays out obviously in the foregrounding of radiation, which is a constant theme throughout. Throughout the Guns, so throughout the Dark Tower series, you keep coming back to radioactive wastelands and so forth, which as a child of the era he was, it's an obvious source of fear. But you also get, like you say, it's almost like a spiritual or a emotional decay. The thing that always haunts me about the Gunslinger, I think it's genuinely, I think it's just one of the best images in any kind of weird fiction I've ever come across. It's when he's walking. I think he's walking past a bar, and he can hear from the bar this broken down, barely functioning, out of tune honky tonk piano playing the end of Hey Jude, and a bunch of cracked voices singing it, and it's clear they've been singing it for like maybe half an hour. You know what I mean? Like they just keep on this loop. And it's what I love about it is the symbolism of it's this kind of a piece of art. Let's face it, Stephen King being the age he is, a piece of art that would have felt like a holy text, right? One of the all-time greats, one of the kind of, Mount Rushmore, Mount Olympus, whatever you want to call it, works of art, has become imbecilic and they're stuck in this loop of just repeating it without understanding. And it's become a corruption of itself, or it's become this artifact of something better, but that they can no longer reach directly, and so they're in this kind of almost like cargo cult kind of, and it's just
it's an echo of an empty world, isn't it? There's nothing there.
And it gives me the fucking shivers like nothing, man. It's so good.
A lot, and so much of the Gunslinger is about that, isn't it? So much is about those echoes that he encounters of places that aren't alive anymore. That shouldn't be alive anymore. It's like they're scraps of places that have sort of flaked away from the corpse of creation. It's
Right.
so cool.
And you could look at it and say, oh, is that meant to imply that this is somehow the place he is a kind of, is this a post-apocalyptic? Is this some version of Earth? But I think something in the writing, I don't think it's explicit, but I think something in the writing tells you no, it's more like this is leaked through. This is kind of leaked through a thin wall.
Yeah, this is more like an alternate, isn't it? These are like they're times and places that don't even belong to anywhere anymore.
Right.
That's how far we've gone.
Yeah.
It's a Frankensteinian creation. Everything's bleeding together now. Everything's permeable. And I love that about the original Gunslinger. I mean, I do love the other Dark Tower books as well, but I find they become much more explicit about what is actually going on after that. The Gunslinger has this wonderful poetic quality about it, where so much is implied.
The thing about the Gunslinger is he didn't have a fucking clue what he was doing, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, he had just images, didn't he? He's following images. He's trying to do like Sergio Leone, he's trying to do Tolkien, he's trying to do Lovecraft, he's trying to do a little bit of Moorcock, he's trying to, and I love that. I mean, the notion, the concept, for one thing, the idea to throw together spaghetti western and Tolkien-esque fantasy.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I think that's fucking brilliant myself. And mingle that with Arthurian myth. It's spectacular.
But also, like, what I love about that is he's taken Tolkien, which is like the text for fantasy, arguably, right? Or modern fantasy anyway. But then he's also doing that genius thing of reapplying it both to his cultural moment but also his cultural milieu, and he's saying, what's my version of that? Well, it's the fucking spaghetti western. That's the larger than life kind of, and also because of what the spaghetti western is in its terms of America's self-mythologizing, we've got James Bond, they've got the spaghetti western, and the western in general, but particularly the spaghetti western, right? And I just love that. I love how it's like, because it's like he instinctively understands already there's something inherently kind of sweaty and broken about the spaghetti western as a concept, right? There's already inherently something sick under the surface of that self-mythologizing. There's actually something quite fundamentally diseased and ill going on. So it's so great that he sees that, and then he's like, right, so now what happens if you smash, as you say, Arthurian legend and Tolkien, just smash them straight the hell into this? And what does it look like?
Yeah, you use those to tease out the best of this.
Yeah.
The mythic elements of these characters, the things that mean something to us as human beings. I just think that's beautiful. I really do. But that doesn't, and not dilute the darkness at the same time.
No.
Utterly brilliant. I love the Gunslinger. I think it's still one of the best things he's ever written.
I fucking love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's an interesting thing about King. Like, I really do appreciate the fact that I genuinely do appreciate the fact he's developed as an artist over the decades, and he has. And there are a lot of ways in which you can't really argue. There are a lot of ways in which he's a better writer than he was in those younger days. But I also, there is something in the energy of King's early work. There is something about there is a quality to it, to me, that has this. Part of it is swagger, and he talks about this in the introduction to the rewrite of the Gunslinger, right? He talks about being 19 and feeling like you're pretty hot shit, and he was. And I love stuff when we think about all the stuff we've just talked about in relation to the Gunslinger, and then imagine, like, he's 19, so he's doing all of it on instinct. It's all just pure instinct, talent, fury. That's it. That's all he's got. But guess what? That's enough. That's more than enough. And it's like, you can see why it wasn't his first published novel, right? You can see why it took until Carrie for people to go, oh yeah, this is what we want. But I think there's something about that, as I say, the early stuff that ended up as the background book. So particularly, we haven't even mentioned The Long Walk either, which I think is another incredibly, and that's another first person piece as well, incredibly stick. Really, really powerful. I mean, blood all over the page on that one. And also, like, The Long Walks. I've said this before on other shows, but The Long Walk's one of those classic ideas where, as a writer, you get the concept, and I don't know about you, but my first thought is like, that's fuck. Actually, mechanically, how do you sit down every day for however long it's going to take to describe that 3-day journey by foot? Because you can't really cut away. You can't really, like, how just mechanically.
How do you do it without losing the energy, right? How do you do it without it becoming dull, without it becoming repetitive, and without you as the writer just... I mean, you and I have probably both done this with certain works of our own, when you've got a situation that is very boxed in, where it is just one thing, it's one setting, it's one room, it's one house, it's whatever. It is hard to write, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it was almost a speciality of mine for a little while. I mean, Godpop certainly was. I definitely created some very serious constraints for myself with the setup of that one. I mean, look, there's strength to it too, right? There's power to it as well, for sure. But I think that's the thing, right? Is like you really have to understand enough about storytelling to figure out what are those strengths, and then you've got to lean all the way into them. And I think The Long Walk's just... I mean, I just think, it's an absolutely fantastic novella or short novel or whatever the hell it is anyway. But again, when you think about how old he was when he wrote it, and again, like The Dark Tower, like The Gunslinger, sorry, there's this beautiful hinted at world building in The Long Walk. It's some kind of dystopian near future America or alt future America, but it's super vague. It's this, and it's so good.
He's very good at that age of doing that, actually, of suggesting, implying the world around the characters. Because, like you say, he doesn't make it explicit. There's no point in which a character sits down and says, this is what's going on. This is the state of the world. This is what's happened. You just infer it. And that's my jam. I love that kind of storytelling. I've always loved that kind of storytelling. And I think when King allows himself to do it, he's really bloody good.
I mean, the funny thing about it as well, isn't it? Like, he's also said, like, he hates explanations. I think he says it in the story notes to Nightmares and Dreamscapes. He says, I think it's it's the one about, it's either the one about the toads or the one about the finger, like coming out the drain. And he's talking about, and he's in the story notes. He says, he says basically one of his biggest bugbears is explanations. He says, they always tell me I've got to write one, and I don't like it. And he said, I'm not always very good at it. I mean, he talks about the doctored LSD and Firestar. He's like, I don't know, was that good? I don't know. But then he said, part of what's so fucking great about a short story is sometimes the answer to the question, why did that happen, is, don't ask.
It happens, it happens, and that's
it just
right?
fucking did, And it's funny, because now I think about that in terms of those early works that we're talking about, and you think about, like, The Gunslinger, you think about The Long Walk, The Running Man as well. We do not get told, there is no history of how society collapsed to The Running Man or The Long Walk, or how Midworld became Midworld in The Gunslinger. We do get it later on in The Dark Tower, but we don't get it in The Gunslinger. But we don't need it. He understands that in those books, like, you don't explain, you show. Exactly. And the readers will just fucking work it out. And I love that.
We'll do it ourselves. It'll become interactive storytelling. We will determine in our own imaginations. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I see it. It was actually, I was reading the Wikipedia entry for The Mist earlier, and I had no idea how influential this story was in other media. I had no idea. So video games, right?
Yeah.
We've done a podcast on Half-Life. Do you know Half-Life was originally going to be called Quiver?
Oh, really?
As in Arrowhead Project.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So
of course when you look at it, of course when you look at it, it's the same fucking idea, isn't it? It's the same. They're experimenting with interdimensional travel, and aliens come through. And you're like, of course it is. The one that got
it The Mist Ground Zero, couldn't you?
You so could. Yeah. This is what's happening in the Arrowhead Project, right? What's going on in Black Mesa is what's happening in the Arrowhead Project. The other one is Silent Hill, of course.
Sure.
Visually, so much comes from The Mist. It's unbelievable. There's even, I did not know, but I until I was rereading it for the purposes of this podcast, there's a bit where the protagonist, whose name I can never fucking remember, he's talking to one of the other people in the shop, and the guy says to him, what if there isn't anything else beyond the mist? What if it's like eaten away? The roads and I'm like, this is Silent Hill. This is what physically happens in Silent Hill. When you try to go back up the road, you find that is exactly what has happened. The world has fallen away. You get the image of the sort of weird pterodactyl thing smashing through the window. That happens in the early quarters of Silent Hill. When Harry wakes up in the cafe, that is exactly what happens. There are so, and of course, I mean, Silent Hill has a road that's called Backman Street. You know, it's
Right.
like
Right.
the
You know what?
influence is so clear.
That's really cool. I mean, you know what I love about that pterodactyl on as well? I was reading, I didn't get to do a full reread of The Mist. I did watch the black and white movie again today. I didn't get to, I just didn't have time, but I did a kind of spot read. There were a couple of scenes I wanted to reread, and I also reread the story notes for The Mist in Skeleton Crew. And that's where I got the thing about like the fact that it had been written for Dark Forces. But what I love about that is as well, he talks about how the idea came from him, and that pterodactyl coming through the window, that was it. He was actually, there'd been a storm, as there was in the story. He was at the supermarket with his boy. Can't remember if it was Joe or the other one. And then in the way he describes it in Skeleton Crew, with classic kind of, what is Skeleton Crew, like 82, 84 King? So with classic kind of, you know, high functioning alcoholic King bluntness, he says, you know, I was halfway down the dry goods aisle when the muse shat on my head. That's how he described it. He just pictured the pterodactyl coming through the window and knocking over a bunch of the pile of beans and stuff. And he said he had about half the story in his head by the time he'd gotten back to the house, and he'd written it in like, I don't know, something ridiculous, like a week or something.
I can sort of believe that, because there is when you read the story, not only is there an incredible energy to it, but he avoids a lot of the sort of King tropes, if you like, in his writing, where he doesn't deviate at all. There are very, very, very few moments. There's one or two maybe, and they are very, very brief, and they don't really detract from the story at all. You know, for the most part, it is clean as a whistle. It just veers on. You know, it's pace and pace and pace. It's plot. And the imagery, I just think is fantastic. You know, the way he just drip feeds it in. When you first see through the eyes of the protagonist, the mist just coming across the lake. And there's something off about it. It's not quite right, but you don't quite know what. It's too straight, isn't it? It's too clear.
That's right.
There's something unnatural about it. And then you see it through like Nort's eyes as well, you know, the neighbor. And through the kid's eyes as well, and you're sort of like, oh yes, something very, very bad going to happen when that hits the land.
It's great. I mean, I love the line of dialogue in the movie where the wife's like, "Have we seen a mist like that?" And it's like, "There's been mist on the lake, yeah, but coming off the mountain like that." And I love the way the guy said. I mean, the actor's great in that. I mean, the whole cast is fantastic in the movie, but the actor does such a great
in the film. Bloody hell.
No, they're astonishing.
Jesus. I mean, and there's a couple of Stephen King alumni in there as well. There's a couple of actors that are in so many Stephen King adaptations. The guy who initially comes in from and says there's something in the mist where he's got blood on. He is in everything. He is in everything. He is in so many like 1990s sort of Sky One-ish like adaptations of books. He's in loads of them.
Well, I mean, Darabont really likes him as well, because he also was in the first couple of seasons of Walking Dead.
Of course.
Which was, a very right-on bit of casting. And he's wonderful. I mean, he's a great actor. And I mean, that's what I love about that in the movie, is how much Darabont leans into the B-moviness of that moment. That's full 1950s Invasion of the Body Snatchers fucking yelling in the street. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
And he even has the camera do that weird like twist zoom where it's slightly off kilter as it goes in, and you're just like, yes, mate. Yes. Fucking lean into it. Just don't even pretend it's not what it is. You know? I love that. I love that moment. It's so cool.
The film is, I mean, it is so strange. I find the film slightly uncanny myself. In the same way I find like Jackson's adaptations of The Lord of the Rings slightly uncanny, because so much of it looks exactly how I pictured it.
It's like, really impressive, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's like when filmmakers do that, I always feel slightly odd. It feels almost invasive, doesn't it? You know what I mean? Because it's like, how do you know? How do you get it so full on brilliant correct as that?
Yeah, what are you doing inside of my head, and can you please get out? Because there's barely room for me in here.
For me, the bit that really did it, it's the bit that always stuck in my mind from when I first read the short story when I was way too young to read it. It's the bit with the tentacles coming under the shutter.
Oh, fuck.
I loved that as a kid. I went nuts. I loved it. I had not encountered Lovecraftian fiction at that point.
Right.
I did not know what Lovecraftian meant. I didn't know anything about tentacles and eldritch abominations and anything like that. But what I did know was that I loved monsters. I always had a penchant for the monsters.
Yeah.
So when those tentacles turned up, I was like, oh, what could that be? What could that be? And that was my introduction to sort of Lovecraftian monstrosity, if you like. And it's very much stuck with me. But in the film, it's perfect.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's exquisitely executed, that whole sequence. And it's an odd thing, actually. Just a brief aside. I realized I've not actually watched the color version of The Mist. The circumstances under which I first saw the movie were it was a screening at the BFI. They were doing a series of, it was King's, I think it was his 60th birthday or 65th. They were doing a series of screenings, so I went and saw a double bill on the IMAX of Carrie followed by The Shining. That was with my dad. Yeah, that was absolutely fucking amazing.
Wow.
And I was looking ahead because they were showing everything, right? And some of them, it was like, because I had to do a trip to London each time, I didn't have tons of money at this point in my life. So it was like, I wanted to do that double bill with my old man because I knew that would be really cool. And also I knew he'd pay for the tickets. I knew I wanted to go to at least one other, but I was looking at the list and it was like, I love Maximum Overdrive. I love it unironically. I know it's terrible, but I love it. And I don't give a shit. And I was really sorely tempted to go and see Maximum Overdrive on the big screen, but it was like, yeah, but really, that's like, it's like 20 quid for the ticket plus 30 quid for the, the taxi and the train. Like, do you 50 quid love it? Really? Do you?
Yeah. Do you love
the big
it
screen? And also like, are you going to get that much more out of seeing Maximum Overdrive on a big screen than you would just sticking the DVD on at home? Let's face it, probably not. And I'm going through the list, and there's a few others. Night Flyer I was tempted by because, it's the guy from Robocop, and I think he just died, Miguel Ferrer. And I thought, well, I've never seen it. I heard good things about it. But again, is it a big screen movie? And I ended up picking The Mist kind of at the last minute. And it was the first, I think it was the first time the black and white version had been shown in a UK cinema. And I just went, I had not seen it at all. I'd not seen the movie, but I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And in my head, I'd got it scrambled with the movie version of The Fog. It's just complete,
which I imagine happens. I imagine that does happen.
So you can imagine me sitting down. I took my stepson as well, and he was like, I think he was 16 at the time, and he was doing horror cinema as part of his like A-level or whatever. He was doing
wow.
So he was, so it was a cool thing to take him to. But of course, neither of us were remotely prepared for what was about to happen. No. It took me about 10 minutes to be like, okay, this definitely isn't The fucking Fog because it's clearly quite modern. It's quite recent. I recognize all these actors, and also, but yeah, just it's a fucking incredible movie. And that sequence with the tentacle, it's funny. I was watching it tonight, and I was thinking, I literally can't imagine what this looks like in color because the way that sequence uses the shade and the darkness and and it just looks so beautiful in black and white. These little.
I honestly can't get over it because it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work. You've got this horror movie where there are these big CG monsters, and normally, particularly horror cinema from this era, that is death.
Yeah, sure.
It's absolute death when you've got these CG monsters running around because CG of the era was not that great.
No.
And somehow they've done it here. It's something about the design of the monsters, the conception of them, the way they move. They feel like real animals, for one thing, and that's very important. That's very important because one of the wonderful things about the myth that I absolutely love is it's that nihilistic element of this being another ecosystem that's encroaching on our own. They're not monsters, these things. They're not monsters. They're animals.
Yeah, that's
They're creatures from some other space and time that is inimical to ours. It's inimical to humanity.
I mean, to the extent where, and I love this, and I think I can't remember the degree to which this is in the novella. I think it is in the novella, but it's certainly completely explicit in the movie. To the extent that the animals themselves have their own kind of predatory chain. They have their own, you get the little bugs. I mean, little, they're not little by human size, but, the bugs like on the window, but then the big things flying, it's flying and start eating them, right?
Of course,
So
then
you get the sense
things
that there's a
like
food chain, and then there's this
yes,
bigger creature. So there really is
the
a sense that
spiders, the colonial spiders,
God.
which are the worst
Yeah.
thing in it, by the way. They
Those
are
fuckers.
vile. They
You
are
know,
the
'cause-
way. The way that he describes that in the short story,
yeah,
the strands of web that cut, that sort of
Yeah.
burn and cut through. Oh, that's so vile. That is so vile.
it's good. You know what I love about it though? I was thinking this is, and it was when he talked about the where he got the inspiration for the story in the first place. You know, the idea of being in the supermarket and imagining the pterodactyls smashing through the window.
Yeah.
The other thing I love about that is, I don't know about you, but I genuinely do remember having thoughts like that as a kid.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yes. I'm sure, not to sort of transpose my own internal workings onto everyone else, but I'm sure every child did that. We
Right.
forget, but I'm sure
Yeah.
every child did that. Because our imaginations are just like that when we're that young, aren't they? We cannot distinguish between reality and what's internal and what's fantastical. We do it in our own bedrooms. You know, we have these feverish imaginings where we
Absolutely.
project the walls receding and, you know, openings and creatures pouring in and all sorts of stuff like that. Absolutely, yes. I think part of being, you know, I'll be honest, it sounds almost cliche, but part of being a writer, particularly if you're doing the speculative stuff, is that it's retaining that capacity somehow. Whatever goes away for so many people when you transition, you know, when you transition from being like 10-year-old to an 11-year-old, that abyss doesn't happen for us. We have a kind of like arrested development thing happening, and somehow we still do that. When we go into supermarkets, when we go into airports, when we go into train stations, we suddenly start imagining them in these fantastical ways. And it doesn't go away, you know?
Yeah, I mean, because I remember, there's two things. I remember, like, as a kid, vividly, I remember having this absolute kind of horrified fascination with suspension bridges. I think I'd seen photos of the Golden Gate Bridge or something. And I would always have two recurring kind of horror scenarios that would evolve around. And one would be some kind, and this, by the way, this is before I knew Godzilla existed, but it would always be either some kind of giant monster breaking the metal strands that hold the bridge up so it falls. And the other one, which again, you're just gonna have to trust me, I remember having this nightmare years before I went to see James Bond Roger Moore View to a Kill, was being on top of one of them, being on one of those cables that stretches up, somehow ending up there and being stuck or having to climb it, you know, and just the horror of just being that exposed to the elements. You know, that kind of, you know, the inherent kind of, and also the thing, I think there was something about being in a physical space that you could technically be in, but you clearly was not designed for a human to be in, and was in fact a very dangerous place for a human to be. My mind would often go to places like that. So yeah, absolutely. But I think for me, the interesting thing about reading that in the story notes was thinking like, holy fucking shit, like, big part of being Stephen King is having that thought, and instead of thinking, well, that's a fucking dumb thought, you know, like, what a stupid fucking thing to think, it's going like, okay, I'm gonna write that bastard down, you know, like, and suddenly you've got one of the most iconic horror novellas of all time.
I so chime with that though, because that tends to be how I write. You know, it tends to be like an image that comes and it just flashes, and it's like, right, okay, let's see what happens. And very often it doesn't. You know, very often it flitters out, or it goes into places that it shouldn't go, and it doesn't work. But I can so totally see how, you know, you are bored. You are really, you know, you're not entirely happy. You're in the middle of a supermarket. There's lots of people around. There's just been a storm. You don't really want to be there. The kids are maybe bored and playing up, and you just want to get in and get out. And your mind is going into overdrive, and it starts to do these things.
Yeah.
It starts to it starts you imagining. Like, didn't Toby Hooper say that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre came from something very similar? He was in a supermarket. He was in the hardware section. And it was like a Black Friday, so there were just swarms of people, gaggling for and he was in the hardware section, and he saw a chainsaw, and he thought, just for a fleeting instant, if I could just get that down and cut my way through. And that's kind of part of where the Texas Chainsaw Massacre came from. Those moments, those crystallized moments, That's it, right? That's it.
Yeah.
That's where story comes from. And I love it. And then married into that in the Mist, of course, you've got all this other stuff. So the Mist itself,
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
Yeah.
The Mist is so wonderful in and of itself as an entity because you never really figure out what it is. There are loads of implications as to what it might be. Is it like a phenomena from some other dimension, or is it like the gateway itself? Is it somehow a phenomena that's bringing these creatures? It's hard to say because the story, it offers potential explanations, and some of them are really freaking out there, by the way. I mean, we've got conflicting ideas here. So you've got the Arrowhead Project, which is the scientific explanation that it's some military experiment into interdimensional travel that's gone awry.
Yeah.
Then you've got Mrs. Commodity's explanation, is entirely other.
Yeah.
But you know what? At this point in this store, it's hard to determine which one's true, isn't it?
Well,
and at this point, does it matter?
If you really want to bake your noodle, right? I mean, technically, it could be both.
It could be both, right?
Right? Because there's no actual incompatibility between the two versions of events, if you think about it. Because it could well be that the scientists have pierced a hole into an alternate reality, and it could also be that God made them do that because he's pissed off with us.
So he's annoyed, right?
They pierced into a really shitty reality that we're going to have to deal with now.
Well, is it even a shitty reality? I mean, that's one of the wonderful things that I find about the story. It's only shitty because it's inimical to humanity. But at this point, humanity's done, right?
That's true, yeah.
One of the things I absolutely love about returning to the story in both of its forms is that these people who are trapped in the supermarket, that's it. They're looking out at the end of everything, and whatever they do, it doesn't matter.
I mean, that's what I really love about it, right? Or one of the things I really love about it. You're absolutely right. It's that bubble of humanity in the middle. And look, by the way, this is a thing that King will do time and time again. The Raft is that. It's a smaller group of people and it's a smaller environment. Survivor Type is that. The Langoliers is that.
The Langoliers is very much that, yeah.
And I mean, apologies to anyone who only knows the Langoliers through the absolutely dreadful movie version, but actually the original novella.
I fucking love it. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's like it's bad in a way you can't quite conceive of unless you were like, if you're a King fan in the 1990s.
Well, Jesus Christ. I mean, we were just talking about how dodgy creature effects normally were in CGI in 2008, right? Like, imagine what it was like when it was being done on a fucking Amiga 500.
Right. The mid 1990s. This is spectacular. Guys, as an aside, if you haven't seen the Langoliers, the Sky adaptation of the Langoliers, do yourselves a favor.
I can't recommend. Please read the book first, at least, though. Please read the book first, because the book's actually good.
Honestly, that adaptation is garbage on so many levels. It's difficult to comprehend.
It's
like the actors? What are they doing?
and why are they doing it?
Why are they doing? It's one of those projects where you watch it and you're wondering, was there an acting director present?
Yeah. Or was it just
Probably
like
not. Probably
was it just
not.
like, here's the script, see you in 3 months?
Yeah, might have been watching it. It might have been that, because there are some performances in that where you're like, if there were any kind of acting director present, they'd have gone, dial it down, like by a factor of n. Dial it right down.
You know what, though? This is a good thing to pick up on, though. I'm glad we started talking about this, because I also think that the Langoliers is a great example of why Darabont is so perfect for King. Because the Mist opening credit says, written for the screen by Frank Darabont. And that is damn right. Because the Langoliers is exactly what happens. Actually, the Sky adaptation of The Shining is the other thing. When you try to do a page-for-page translation. Because actually, the Langoliers is a pretty faithful representation of the novella. But
you know what? It's totally faithful.
It is, yeah.
It's like, it's so faithful. It's down to the minutest detail, the language. There isn't a line uttered in the adaptation that isn't in the novella.
Right.
Not a line. Not a line.
Yeah. Whereas when Darabon's writing The Mist for the screen, he understands, for starters, what actors can do.
Yes.
So he knows that he can write one line and it will have a page's worth of exposition behind it with the right actor delivering that line.
Yes.
Because actors can do so much.
And he knows that it is an adaptation. And therefore it needs to change for screen. It needs to change to work. There are certain things in the short story which I love that short story to bits. I'll always love it to bits because it wasn't just my introduction to Lovecraftian fiction. It was also, I'm fairly certain about this, it was the first horror short story I ever read, like adult horror short story. I'm fairly certain. It was I was that young. I was like 6, 7 maybe when I read that.
Fantastic place to start, though.
I know. Well, it sticks. I'm telling you. It's in there. It's in the mix. It's so in the mix. It's there. It's in my mind, and I remember obsessing about it.
Yeah.
I remember talking to my mum about it because we were on holiday, and I'd finished all my short story, all my store of books. And I read that because that mum had that. She had big hardback version of Skeleton Crew with her. And I read that, and I was just awed. I was just swept away by it. I thought it was brilliant. I remember reading it in the hotel room. I remember reading it by the pool and not doing what I was supposed to do as a 6-year-old. It really had stuck in a significant way. And
again, I think that speaks to the strength of what you were saying earlier about the pacing of the storytelling as well, because you cannot hold a 6-year-old's attention if you're going to digress. It's not going to work.
Absolutely not. And I think the way it works with once the situation is established, it's kind of set pieces, isn't it? It's moment for moment. And that is not a condemnation. That works beautifully.
No, it's brilliant.
Because it escalates so well. It
what I love
so well.
Is how the movie kind of carries that forward explicitly in the way that it literally has. It only does it a couple of times, but it just fades.
Yeah.
You have a set piece, and then it just fades to black, and then it fades back in again. And
it's almost like
some
breath, right? It's giving you and the characters a breath, because if it kept going on, it wouldn't work as well. The pacing would be off. You wouldn't get that moment of relief, and it is so relentlessly grim.
Yeah,
that's the other thing. It's not just grim in terms of like what's happening externally. Obviously, it's that whole thing of the real horror is within. And that is part of the story, which is derived from the original text, and it is a bit thorny. Like we said at the beginning, there is a certain reactionism to the way King portrays human beings under duress in this story. Like a lot of the in the short story, I'd say most of the characters outside of the kids are absolutely loathsome.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I've thought of both the essays. I've written 2 essays about The Mist, and both of them I kind of talk about that aspect of it a bit, and I worry at it because we've had this conversation before in other contexts, right? The central issue with it is it makes for a really cool horror story, but what we know in reality is that in reality people don't do that. People pull together in times of crisis, right? They cooperate to a quite extraordinary and often in a quite self-sacrificing way.
Yes.
Specifically, like people will go above and beyond for each other, for strangers, under the right circumstances or wrong circumstances, depending on how you put it, I suppose.
And we know this like not only from like isolated examples from history, but also through numerous sociological and psychological studies. There is a raft of actual academic information that tells you this is what human beings are generally like. There are exceptions, there are people who are there are always
sociopaths or whatever, absolutely. But
they are the outliers. They are the outliers.
But I think what King's worrying at here, and it's something that he was worrying at in this era quite a bit, and so were a lot of other horror writers of his age, perhaps for understandable reasons. It comes up again in The Dead Zone. It's fundamentally, there's something about the post-war generation, the boomer generation, of which King is part, that looks back at World War II, and the question they ask is the question I think we all ask probably when we're children and we first learn about the horrors of what Nazi Germany became, which is how
Yeah.
How does someone like that end up in charge, right? Now, you know, that's a question that has a lot of answers, and they're very, very complicated. But I think one of the flaws, I think, of the liberal mindset in particular when it's dealing with this question, is that the liberal mindset, in tune with the conservative mindset, will say part of the problem is the mob.
Yeah.
This is what happens when the mob is in charge. This is what happens when mindless mob stuff happens, right? And it's like, that's really not a good explanation for
it's really
Nazism is, or how it works.
It's ahistorical, for one thing. It's absolutely not the truth.
Yeah. But I also think it does come from an honest place, in a sense. So you kind of have to applaud this, in the sense that it's like, I think a lot of those writers are looking deep within themselves and saying, well, hang on, though. If your comfortable middle-class life was threatened and you had the opportunity to go along with the tide and it meant you'd be okay, but maybe your neighbor got dragged away, would you actually stand up?
Exactly, yeah.
And you know what? That is a hard question to ask, and most of us will never know the answer. And those of us who do know the answer will only find out for sure when we're tested, and that will be a horrible, horrible moment for all of us, however it plays out. Yeah. And I don't fault those writers or those creators in that moment for doubting themselves or doubting their neighbors.
No, and it's an exploration that is worth having as well. That's the other thing. I think it's what King is doing here is what he's very good at. He's putting characters, human beings, in a pressure cooker, you know, in an isolated environment under duress where they don't know what they're doing. And also, it's not wider humanity. That's the other thing I take away from the story. This is very specific. It's King doing Americana again, isn't it? It's that very particular generation.
Exactly.
And it's this particular place and time and type of American.
Actually, this is King, especially this era King, and I love how much this era King used to do this as well. He's actually taken a pop at small town America. This is him saying, well, yeah, you're goddamn right, fascism could rise in small town America. Yes, it fucking could. Every day of the week it could. And by the way,
it's a very condensed, I mean, you mentioned Nazi Germany earlier, and it's actually a very condensed example of exactly how that happened. So the day before the Nazis took power, if you look at the satirical magazines that were being published, you know, sort of what the bourgeoisie of Germany would be reading and laughing at, you know, over their coffees at, they were ridiculing Hitler and the Nazis, absolutely ridiculing them. How can these utter fucking clowns ever get it? You see exactly the same with Trump. Exactly the same, and that's the mistake they always make, isn't it?
You know what's amazing to me?
Always make.
What's amazing to me with Trump is, you know, like I get on an intellectual level, I get doing that in 2016, right? They're still doing it now.
Yeah,
he fucking won once, guys.
He won, and that's
what are you talking about? Have you just memory hold the fact that fucking
it's already been done? It's already over, right? In that instance, it's already over. And here you have Mrs. Kamadi, of course, in that role, and she is utterly ludicrous, right? She is literally the town fool. She's the town lunatic. She is the tinfoil hat, chemtrail, QAnon, Nibiru, reptilian believing, crazy 5G nutcase, right?
Yep.
He is that person. And yet...
But, you know, and that's the thing, though, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing where you do have to give King a certain amount of credit, because pre-Trump, you and I might have gone, hey, come on. It's a bit far-fetched. Someone that out there, that left field, that crazy with it. But, like, post-Trump, you do have to kind of say, no, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. In our current political circumstances on this side of the pond as well, given what's arising.
Oh, true story, True story.
Absolutely, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And they are like this woman. They are paranoid and crazy, and they believe the most absurd things and make the most outlandish, ridiculous statements. And people do keep following them and believing them and supporting them. So there is a slightly misanthropic truthfulness to this situation, reactionary or not.
And, you know, well-meaning liberals stand on the sidelines scratching their heads saying, I don't understand. We were so funny.
I know. And we were so reasonable as well. We gave them all the facts, and it's like, you just misunderstand, don't you? You fundamentally misunderstand how these people work. You know what they need to do? They need to go and take a look at how cults operate. That's what they need to do. They need to go and look at the testimonials on YouTube from like ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Mormons and people who have gotten out of Scientology and those freaks from the Twin Flames thing. You know, they need to go and look at that. That's what they, because then they will understand. Then they will understand. You can ridicule. When you ridicule people for those beliefs, and they are ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. I totally get it. But it feeds into the victim mentality. It feeds into that persecution complex. It actually feeds the narrative that they've built up in their own minds, the identity that's fed by this position that they're taking.
Yeah, because it feeds the persecution complex, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly that. Exactly that. It's that projectionism. You know, they will accuse their tribal victims, their tribal enemies, of having a persecution complex all the time. Oh, you identify as a victim. Why do you identify as a victim? There is no one on earth who identifies more as a victim than your average racist or trans.
That's far right. That's it.
You know, absolutely. There is no one on earth more persecuted in their own heads.
Yeah, well, you know, because this country used to be all right before the ... right? I mean, it's always what it is.
Exactly, that's always what it is. I mean, and we see it manifested in our politics, of course. I mean, what is Brexit other than that? Or what is Brexit other than that? It is this desire to return to a mythical 1970s, isn't it? An entirely mythical 1970s.
Yeah. And by the way, a mythical 1970s, because those people who actually remember the 1970s will tell you it was pretty shit, actually.
It was pretty absolutely goddamn awful.
It was pretty shit.
It was pretty shit. Yeah. In any objective sense, when you look at things like death rates, when you look at things like infant mortality, when you look at disease, when you look at poverty, when you look at the way ethnic minorities were treated, women were treated, black people were treated, the corruption of the police and politicians. It was an appalling time. It was an appalling time. What you often get, I mean, even from people who were alive at that time, and I've had this conversation, is, oh, we were alive then and we didn't starve. And it's like, oh, fuck you. Yeah, a lot of people did.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
And not only that, you don't remember. You think it was better because you were younger.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I'm starting to see it amongst our generation now, you know, and I hate it. I fucking hate it. You know, those memes that like show 1980s cartoons. Oh, if you watch this, your childhood was great. Fuck off. In the 1980s, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? You know, when Savile was at his height, it was great.
You know what I mean? I just strap any fucker who says that to a chair and make them watch the movie Pride until they cry their fucking hearts out and be like, better my ass.
Better, things were better back then, weren't they? Absolutely. Jesus. You know, they were better for some of you because you were children and you had no conception of what the world was actually like.
And look, real talk, some of you still haven't dealt with the fucking trauma that was inflicted upon you, and you're sitting there saying it never did me any harm when it fucking did.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know?
Or not in any, I mean, that's the word, that for me, someone who's interested in psychology, that is one of the worst things. You can never know your own mind, ever.
Sure.
You can never know your own mind. It's the one thing you have no objectivity over whatsoever, not even the delusion of objectivity. You need other people to help you with that. You cannot make that self-assessment. I'm okay psychologically. And very often the insistence that you are, especially if it's particularly insistent and shrill, is evidence that you're fucking not. Believe me, it really is.
I think I'm more comfortable about the people who have healthy levels of doubt and skepticism and concern over their personal level of mental health. They're the ones I got more time for and more likely to enjoy the company of.
Me too. But that's what you get here, isn't it? That's what King's actually expressing. It's what's crystallized here. And it's I mean, in that regard, the monsters almost have like a metaphorical or metaphysical quality. That's another thing that's going on here, right? The mist and whatever's in it is in a way, Kamadi is right. It is exact. It's like the sins returned upon us. Yeah. We had our chance and we fucked it. We completely fucked it. And now,
but I also think, go on.
There's a chance for something else.
Yeah.
There's a chance for something, because you know what? This world is not going to die. That's another thing. This world isn't dead. It's florid with life. It's just a different kind of life.
I mean, that's one of the ways for me I find it so interesting in that it does feel, that's where it does feel ahead of its time in terms of the environmental message. You know, because for me, you know, a lot of people talk about, you know, about the climate crisis, the climate change, about being, you know, the end of life on Earth, and it's like, I mean, it's theoretically possible. It is theoretically possible.
Yeah, it's actually just assuming
But I
we
think
see the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
It's
but I
the
think
end of this phase of life on Earth.
I think
But life will continue.
What's far more likely is it's just going to be an extinction event for us.
Yeah.
And maybe 50, 60, 70% of the other species on the planet. But that's not the end of life on Earth. That's just the end of us.
That's it.
You know what I mean?
That's
and I get how for most people that's the same thing, and that's fine. But you know, I think it's important. But the trouble is that's where the imprecise language can trip you up a bit, because I think then people will think, oh well, it is, you know, people, it's one thing to conflate it's one thing to use language about the end of the world and what you mean is the end of humanity and understand that's what you mean. I think the problem is that it gets conflated at a certain point.
It does. I mean, and I get that.
You know, no, I get it.
I totally get that. I mean, one of the great sins of it is that it's the end of meaning. That's the great sin, because you know, let's assume life goes on. There's no guarantee that life will ever evolve anything like us ever again.
Sure.
Something that operates in the abstract in the way that we do.
It's the death of consciousness, right?
Right.
As we understand
exactly.
it.
Which may be a rarity. In reality, it may be, insofar as we know it is. We need to operate as though it is, because we can't determine that it's not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We need to look at it as though it is the most precious thing, because we might be the most unique phenomena in all creation. We just don't know.
I mean,
and in that regard, we're worth saving. You know we're worth preserving.
I mean, it's that interesting. I can't remember where I first heard the theory, but I know it's something that Ligotti talked about. But the idea of the great filter, because you know, there's this conundrum of like, given the scale that we now understand of the universe, the chances that there hasn't been another Goldilocks planet that's evolved some form of intelligent life actually is fairly low, because the numbers are so like it's almost certainty. So why haven't we picked up radio signals? Because we should have done.
It's a bit of a worry, isn't it?
Yeah, and the great filter theory is like, if a species gets sufficiently advanced to be able to do it, they find a way to fucking kill themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really like, it's quite distressing, because you hear it and you're like, yeah, that's really cynical. And then you look around and you're like,
yeah, that may be true though, right? It may bear some weight. Yeah. It might actually bear out.
Not to be true, but I don't know, you guys.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's still all to play for. That's the other thing. That's still true. All to play for. That is true.
100%. But to go back to the mist, I mean, it's interesting to me because, like I say, it is definitely, it feels like a slightly ahead of its time ecological message, and maybe even ahead of now, because, like I say, people still have that mentality. But you're right. It's not the end of the world. It's probably the end of humanity.
Yeah.
Because we're suddenly at the bottom of the food chain, other than the top.
Certainly in the short story it is. I mean, there's a slight, like, King throws in a mote of hope at the end. They think they hear something on the radio, don't they? The car radio. There's the name of something.
The real hope in the novella, and this is a bit metatextual, but it's a similar trick. And I've always wondered if King knew about this as well, if King had worked this out and he'd done it, or it's the same thing that Orwell does in 1984. Where at a certain point you realise that as horrific as what's happening in 1984 is, 1984, the book, metatextually exists post whatever state 1984 happening. It has to. And therefore, there is a future in which you are reading this that is a post 1984 future. So somehow humanity in some form has overcome what was going on at that point, right? Now, it's subtle enough that a lot of people miss it, but it's there in the text, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's definitely there, right? And the mist,
it's here, isn't it?
Exactly. And then for me, the novella of the mist does the same thing, because
you do.
We are reading
projection. It. Yes, and he does say at one point, he projects back. It's almost epistemological, isn't it? Yeah. It's almost journalistic. Yeah. So he does say at one point when he's driving away from the house. That was the last time I ever saw my wife again. You know, so it's like he must be telling this retrospectively.
Yeah. But what's great about it is that, because, as I say, like the conceit, I think, is that, but if we, the reader, are reading it, then we, the reader, must exist to read it. Therefore, there must be some post-humanity or post-mist humanity that exists, you know? There has to be. And I love that.
What shape that takes in the new world, it's hard to say, right?
Of course. That's unknowable deliberately, and that's fine. But there's a baked in, and it's not, I mean, optimism feels like too strong a word, but there's a baked in something there, you know, a sense of like, because it's, what I love about it as well, though, it's the fact that, and this is interesting, because again, King, particularly in this era, very fucking angry, but there is also a thing about, I love what the writing represents in terms of the character's mentality. It's a total leap of faith.
Yeah.
That I'm going to write all this stuff down and someone one day is going to find it and read it.
And it's a kind of screaming into the void, isn't it, as well? It's sort of like a defiant act, you know?
Yeah,
and that's what it's all about, ultimately, isn't it? It is, this whole story is about that. That's what the lead characters do all the way through. They defy every narrative, right, that's been imposed upon them.
Sure. But also, metatextually, again, that's what, for me anyway, a big part of what the act of creating art is. I think all art is howl into the void. All art is an attempt to defy death, to present the world with something that will live on after you, that will make people feel something, that will connect you in one way esoteric, in another way very real way, to other people. You know, it's a way for those of us who sometimes struggle person to person or in small groups to effectively connect with people in a way that is a direct interface of the mind, whether that's through music or the written word or cinema, whatever our chosen form is. But I genuinely think it's part of, I speak personally, it's part of what motivates me as a writer, is
likewise
that wanting to have that experience, wanting to give other people a glimpse into that experience, and also
exactly that,
and also feeling part of something bigger than myself, feeling part of a tradition that spread before me and was spread after me. And in my case, the tradition of literature, and to a far smaller extent, the tradition of rock and roll music when I do my band stuff. You know, it's the same thing. It's like, you know, when I'm singing songs that were written, 50 years ago, and that I have every expectation that will be sung 50 years after I'm dead, because they're those kind of songs that just are going to be sung, you know. You kind of feel in the moment, in the living moment as you sing, you feel connected to something bigger, stretching backwards and forwards, a narrative. And it's a weird thing. It's a paradox. You know, the more in the living now you are, the more that you feel that resonance spreading, temporally either side of you. But writing's the same thing. And I love the fact that this guy in the mist, who's an artist rather than a writer, although, sorry, an aside, this is definitely one of the most blatant author inserts I've ever seen. I know King gets a lot of shit for it, but this guy is so, even down in the novella, to the fucking latent alcoholism. The fact he has a couple of beers before he drives into town, and his wife's watching him really carefully, the amount he's drinking, and it's like, dude, do you even know at this point? Do you even understand? Extraordinary stuff. But yeah, I just love how, for me, that act of writing is a total leap of faith by that character that says, I believe someone's going to find this and read it. And then, of course, that optimism is rewarded because we are reading it, whoever we are.
Absolutely.
And I love
that. Yeah, it is beautiful. I mean, it's almost anti-Lovecraftian in that regard, because very often the writer in Lovecraft is doomed. They are writing as an expression of despair and insanity. Right?
How often in Lovecraft does it turn out that you're reading basically you're reading a suicide note, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. I love it's the end of Dagon, right? Where it is literally someone in the insane asylum cell saying, and they're writing this as they're doing, it's at the door. Oh, the door is opening. The horror of it. It's that, right?
Yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely correct. In Lovecraft's fiction, the writing is just despair. It's a vehicle for despair and existential, complete abjection. Abjection. It is not defiance. It's capitulation. Whereas here, I think that's one of the key differences between King and Lovecraft. And I know King loves Lovecraft. King is like, I think he described Lovecraft as the 20th century's dark and baroque prince of horror, if I remember correctly.
That's a fair description, I think. If it sounds like King. Yeah.
This is, without a doubt, one of his most overt love letters.
Yeah, definitely.
In many, many respects. I mean, not only in terms of the image, I mean, you've got tentacles. I mean, for God's sake, there's nothing more overtly Lovecraftian than that. But also in terms of like the nihilism that underpins so much of it, that existential despair, which is part and parcel. And maybe that's where some of the reactionism comes from as well, because of course Lovecraft was reactionary, and he did have this view of humanity as either disposable or as entirely malevolent and unworthy of existing. But
it's also too. It is, but you know what? It's also, I mean, we kind of touched it earlier, but I want to come back to it because it's so important. It's also King's own personal love-hate relationship with small-town America.
Yes, very
because much. He really does go back and forward on this, and he's still doing it. He's still going backwards and forwards on it. So obviously, in his heyday, you've got this. Obviously, it is. I mean, I think probably he might have felt when he finished it, or I finally got that out of my system. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that he really nails it. But then, of course, he doesn't. He comes back. He does needful things.
He does it all the time, doesn't he? He keeps returning to it as well. Even when he's in those bigger novels where he's exploring much vaster ideas, he comes back to it in microcosmic form.
Exactly, and like I mean, but if you think about it, like. I mean, obviously, Castle Rock's a setting for a number of stories anyway, right? But if you think about it, like, you've got The Mist, and that very pessimistic about small-town life and how it plays out when as one of the characters says, when the lights go out. And again, it's as well, don't forget, there's that classic liberal maxim, no society is ever more than 3 missed meals away from revolution, right?
Absolutely. Who is it? I think it's Ollie who says, as a species, we're fundamentally insane, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Which I think is, it's a good line. I mean, I agree. I agree with them in different ways than he maybe meant it. But if you think about it, you've got this one, you've got it, which whether he means it to be or not, it is absolutely a condemnation of, for me, of small town America.
He must mean it in it. He must.
And America in general.
It's excoriating. Right. It's excoriating. It is the most vicious of them.
And well, you say that until you get to needful things, where it's like, just in case you missed the point, I'm going to do it again as a black comedy, and I'm really going to turn it up to 11 this time and snap the knob off, right? So you get that.
I mean, in Needful Things, it makes it absolutely explicit. The metaphor just doesn't exist in Needful
There is no metaphor in Needful Things. It really is.
Leland Gaunt, at the end of that novel, holds his hands up and basically says, I didn't do a damn
fucking thing.
I did nothing.
Right?
It's all there. It was all there before I turned up. It was always going to explode. I'm just here to have fun with it. That's all.
There's echoes of this. And what's so fascinating about it is there's even, and this is where you get that weird political crossover. There's echoes of that in the, there was that strain of kind of Hitler apologism, like / denialism strain that was running. I think particularly in like 70s, 80s is my recollection of like. There was this, and it was an attempt. I mean, an attempt to rehabilitate Hitler. Yeah, good luck with that, lads. But there was this whole thing about like, Hitler didn't really know about the Holocaust. He didn't really know. It wasn't really his policy. It was done kind of lower down. It wasn't really. And the thing is, like, number one, obviously bullshit. Read Mein Kampf. The guy fucking hated Jews with a fiery passion. He was very clear that he wanted to have them all killed. So shut the fuck up. But two, where there is a kind of a kernel of truth inside a giant puff pastry of bullshit. But the tiny kernel of truth is there was something that did happen in Nazi Germany where it was called working towards the Führer. And the idea was that you tried to figure out what Hitler would want and do it to anticipate what his desires would be, right? And that is something that genuinely happened. It happened in certain of the ministries, certain of the leaders who were trying to curry favor. And Hitler kind of set things up that way deliberately. It was part of his philosophy, such as he had a philosophy. The idea of competition. Set up 2 groups that would have overlapping responsibilities, and the theory was let them fight, and the strongest one will win, and that will produce the best outcomes. Which is, when you think about it for more than 3 seconds, is so fucking hilariously wrong-headed. It's kind of wonderful. It's like, okay, so you're just constantly going to be at war with yourself whilst fighting on 2 other fronts. Good luck with that.
This is it. It's no wonder the Nazis were.
Let's fast forward a few years and see.
Exactly. It's little wonder that the Nazis were like an administrative failure almost from beginning to end.
It's like it was like it was almost like there was some fundamental like failure flaws built into the entire fucking system from the beginning. So it's like it was a really fucking dumb idea at every single level. But what you did get, one of the side effects of that was you did get individual Nazi officers, like, you know, people who ministers further down the future, and like coming up with these ideas that they thought, oh, Hitler will like that. That's the kind of thing he's into. So, and that doesn't apply to the Holocaust or the final solution. Just to be crystal clear, I'm not saying that those guys had a leg to stand on with that argument. That was bullshit. But the phenomenon did exist of working towards the Führer, and that thing about like trying to figure out what the scary person in charge wants and anticipate it. And versions of that do happen all the time. They happen in organizations, they happen in political parties in ways big and small. It's kind of tough to talk about because anytime you bring up Hitler, you're kind of God-winning yourself, which is a bit unfortunate, but actually is a kernel of truth. And it's something that I think King is profoundly bothered by, you know? And I mean, Trump really fucking upset him. But if you think about the Dead Zone, right? Like, he predicted Trump in the Dead Zone. Actually, accurately in a lot of ways. The only thing he got wrong was the idea that they'd need a third party and they wouldn't just be able to take over the Republicans. But other than that, he did a pretty good job, actually.
Pretty spot on, isn't it? It's pretty accurate.
And I think for King as an artist, what's interesting to me is he does love small town America as well. You get moments of that in it. There are these beautiful moments in it. The Institute has a moment in it that is a straight up kind of like fantasy eulogy to small town America. That's quite recent, but it's not as straightforward as saying he used to hate it and now he loves it, because you also have relatively recently, the last 10, 15 years, you have Under the Dome, and Under the Dome is fucking vicious. So like that's like Needful Things turned up to 11, right? It's like next level. And again, it's what you were saying earlier, it's the microcosm, right?
I mean, dynamically it's the same story, isn't it? I mean, that's not a condemnation. It is the same. It's the same outline. It's the same like skeleton of the story.
He's just playing it less for laughs this time. Like he's really and of course, you know, Under the Dome, let's not forget, was his response to George W. Bush's era. So it's pre-Trump, but again, it predicts a lot of what happened there, because W laid a lot of the groundwork for that. W was a kind of proto-Trump, actually, in a lot. We kind of forget that now, but he kind of was in a lot of ways.
We do. Yeah, we do in this country too, don't we? I mean, like the way, like particularly our liberal sections have rehabilitated like politicians of the right that are responsible for the conditions we're under now, because they seem more sane than what we've got now.
The fact, I mean, say what you like about the American system. By the way, Trump might still win again, and it might still be the end of American democracy. So that's my context of saying this. At least the fucking guy is on trial in a couple of places. How the fuck is Boris Johnson still walking around making like 5 figures from writing for a fucking right-wing rag, as opposed to doing his own version of like letters from a Cambridge jail, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, what the fuck?
Rotting in the deepest, dankest dungeon, hung upside down.
What the fuck are we doing as a society? How is that, you know? You look at the COVID inquiry alone and you think, how the fuck is like all of them not in jail?
How are they not in jail? Yeah. For
negligence, you know? And like King gets that. Like he really does.
Totally gets it. Yeah,
furious about it.
And it's actually a really clever transition as well. I mean, like it's hard. It's a hard thing to do, especially within the space that this story has to do it. Where you've got Commodity, who is absurd. She is goddamn ridiculous. Even the way he portrays her physically in the short story. I mean, she's not so much absurd physically in the film, but she is clown shoes, isn't she? In the short story, she's ridiculous. She's got these like very bright nylon pants and, you know, this big hair, and she is utterly ridiculous.
I mean, interesting. I think that's one of the ways where I think Darabin does a great job updating the source material, and it is one of the things. It's an interesting thing when you revisit Skeleton Crew as a whole. One of the less edifying things about King's early work, and I say this as someone who is, in case this wasn't already clear, a gigantic fan, but like he does have a tendency towards certain physical signifiers for especially, I have to say, for women that tend to signify kind of malfeasance or ill, and it's a bit unfortunate. For example, in Skeleton Crew, certainly the number of overweight women who are also kind of bad people, it's a pretty strong and it's one of those things where I don't think it's conscious. I think he's drawing on stereotypes about body type. And especially if you think about the 80s, I'm not excusing this, but I'm just to explain it. When you think about particularly how the 80s, and it's kind of, there was almost like I think of it as the beginning of the era of a kind of body fascism, you know, for men and for women, but especially for women, about what the ideal form was.
Oh God, yeah.
And you think about some of like the stand-up comedy routines of that era about overweight women in particular. And look, just this kind of, I mean, it goes beyond objectification. It's really fucking horrible. Just kind of total like, and the idea of, I mean, the idea, I think, as well, of obesity being a kind of, and again, this is quite a liberal idea, you know, as well as a conservative one, a kind of self-inflicted problem.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, but if you live in poverty and you live in a food desert and the only place you can get a hot food for under $5 is fucking McDonald's.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like
exactly that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Totally get it. Totally get it.
And it's, you know, it's, again, I mean, this, to make a reference, we'll both get, and you know, it's a little bit older. It's a little bit the wrong side for King, but there was similar things going on in him for his generation. It's the Captain Planet thing of like, you need to fucking recycle, and if you don't, the world's going to burn, and it's all your fucking fault. And it's like, well, hang on.
It's like, well, yeah. What?
Why am I being given goods in the first? Why is my only option in the first place to buy goods in stuff that needs, you know, that is from a limited resource? Why, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
I
think you're right. There is something about it. It's certainly King of the era. He does tend to use slightly, not stereotype, but almost cartoonish physical factors to define illness or badness or malfeasance. I mean, there's a character in this story called Lafleur, amusingly, and he is like this. He's one of King's essentially bully characters. You know, those bully characters that is obviously suffering from a little bit of small man syndrome. They feel unfulfilled, and they're just mindlessly, it seems to me, utterly mindlessly negative for no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, and those people do exist.
Oh, they
Don't
exist.
get me wrong, they so exist. But you do find them littered throughout King's fiction, and this one in particular, I think he has like a beady eye or something like that.
Yeah.
In this story, and it's sort of like, okay, King, you know, I get it. It, you know, when he convinces the kid to open the shutter, to unblock the exhaust for the generator, that's enough. I don't need anything else. Yeah,
absolutely. No, that's right. And again, I think it's kind of a product of its time, to a degree. And that doesn't excuse King, because he could have been smarter about it, and he could have realized it was an issue then. And there were always people who were thinking smarter than that. So I'm not letting him off the hook for it. Definitely something he doesn't do anymore. So it's clearly something that he's kind of made an adjustment on, which you've got to respect. At least he's developed as an artist, and he's kind of, that's one of the ways he's improved as a writer, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that's something you can point out and say he's better at now than he used to be.
Totally.
But there is something, again, though, there is a certain power to that kind of unfiltered approach that he was taking. And the downside is that the odd prejudice slips out like that. And again, it's less of a downside for the story. It's more of a downside in terms of how it reflects on the author, I think, to be honest. It doesn't really impact the story a great deal either way. It just, you kind of look at the author and like, really, dude?
Yeah, well, it's odd, isn't it? Because it kind of works within the context of the story in the same way that Comedy does. You know, it actually does say something with regards to what the story's thesis in many respects.
Yes.
Lafleur is also one of those characters who shifts very quickly. So he's so weak, he's so lacking in identity and certainty that he initially starts saying to Carmody, if you don't shut up, I'm gonna, you're gonna get my boot up your ass. By the end, he's her most fervent supporter.
And all it had to take for him to get face to face with the shit, right, and just not be able to deal with it on a fairly epic scale.
That's it.
On this subject, then, can we talk about, because if we're going to do, we're talking a little bit about side by side. Can we talk a bit about, I think, the most significant difference between the novella and the movie, which is the character of the neighbor, Brent
Oh,
Norton.
Nort. Yeah, Nort. Yeah. He's a very different character in the film. In the film, I find him more reasonable.
Yeah.
In the short story, there are problems like logistically with the short story that the film solves interestingly. Like Nort, when the protagonist identifies that he needs Nort in order to get people on side, once he's had the episode with the tentacle, he tries to get Nort to go back and look at the tentacle, and it's like, well, yeah, that makes a load of sense.
Yeah.
And they never do. None of the doubters, none of the people who actually follow Nort out into the mist and end up ultimately being ripped to shreds for their time. None of them go back and look at the tentacle. Not one of them do. Because if they did, they wouldn't go out. The film solves it. The film solves it by having the tentacle part that's chopped off dissolve, so they can't go and see it. So their decision ultimately, and Nort's decision ultimately, to lead them out into the mist actually makes sense. And in the film, I kind of get him. I might have been in that party if I'm perfectly honest. Where it's like we need to try something. We need to do something. Sitting here is not helping, regardless of whatever other people are thinking. We might, and even if there is something out there, we might make it. We might make it to our cars or whatever.
I mean, for me, it's one of those really interesting things where I love the version of Norton in both stories, even though they are very different characters.
He's scummier in the
he's
book.
Total scummy. He's a lech.
Yeah,
and he's awful.
He's a bit too negative, which is a thing with a lot of these characters. I know where he's going. Where he's going. He is not going to have a positive outcome.
Yeah. I mean, I think King had at some point a fairly negative experience with an expensive lawyer.
Yeah.
And it feels like, because it has that feeling of a petty revenge to me, the character of Brent Norton. And I say that, by the way,
it does.
I mean that as the highest possible compliment, because I think most of the greatest artists are, amongst other things, petty people. I actually think I'm starting to think it's a quality of greatness, genuinely.
Yeah, look back at like those writers who are enshrined in history and our culture. Look at Shakespeare. Look at Chaucer. Chaucer was absolutely down with this, and the characters that they excoriate, that they make out to be the worst people imaginable, who are actually people they knew or encountered in their life that they just wanted to, they wanted to immortalize as twats, basically. Dante did it all the time. Dante's Inferno is at once this incredibly beautiful metaphysical poem, but the characters who are suffering in the various circles of hell, sometimes it's poetic and metaphorical, other times it's just fucking petty. It's people that Dante knew and didn't like, who felt had slighted him. So it's like, okay, I'm going to have demons sticking pitchfulks up your ass for eternity. Yeah, exactly
Laugh
that.
now, sucker. Cry later.
Exactly that. But no, I mean, it is interesting because I think that is generally true in the film. The film softens the humanity a little bit, and I think it works. I think it really, really works. The characters who are negative, they're not as negative as they are in the book. And you can definitely see more of a, I don't know if it's because you can see them. You can see like the subtleties in their face and their body language and whatnot. You see more of a transition in the film.
But I think especially with Norton, what I really like about it is in the novella, he is this unreconstructed wretch, just vile. And I kind of love that, because again, those people exist. Yeah, and it's kind of fun having someone like that in a situation like this, because it's like in the Poseidon Adventure where you've got the guy being a complete dick, and you're like, I'm really glad about it because you're going to fucking die. I know you're going to die, and I'm not going to be upset about it. And it's kind of a similar thing, right? You're like, okay, it's really sad that it's the end of the world, but at least Norton's going to
Norton's going to get his comeuppance,
and I'm not going to be sad about it.
It is a bit of a sticky wicket in the short story, actually. Why at any point? Because it's a while after the tentacle episode when Norton chooses to lead his group out. It's quite a while after. So why doesn't he or any of them go back to look at the tentacle? It's still there.
I mean, it's a very interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, I think you could probably, I mean, you know, if you were being charitable, you could say King's describing a very particular mentality that you get to a certain point where you don't want to risk being exposed to evidence that will move you away from a fundamental point of view that you're holding, and therefore you just
on the other hand, Norton's a judge.
Yeah, but I think King's saying something about judges. Well, he's an attorney, isn't he? He's going to be a judge, but he's a big city attorney. I think, like I say, I think King had recently had a very unpleasant experience with a lawyer. I'm almost certain.
I like him better in the film, definitely.
Oh, he's a much more likable character. But the thing for me is, what's interesting is, in terms of like who I'd rather meet, obviously the guy in the movie, like streets ahead. Yeah. But I like both the characters in the narratives that they're in. That's the really interesting thing for me. I do love the character in the novella because he's so horrible. Like I enjoy that. I love when King gets, you know, just a slime bag and just, he's so good at writing about slime bags, you know. And
well, to be 100% fair, I mean, the protagonist isn't a great guy in the.
No, he's not. That's true. That's true.
He does have moments where he's not on the level. You know, he is not the greatest guy. He's not the most charitable guy. Like, so, and a lot of that is aimed at Nort. You know, a lot of that is internally is aimed at Nort. You know, I mean, you are, of course, the episode that I don't think is in the film anyway, where he basically has the affair.
No, it's not in the film. That's right.
That's not in the film, is it? That's really interesting, and I get it. I totally get it. It's the Eros Thanatos thing, and in that circumstance, when there's nothing else, when you've just seen what you've just seen, and you need something to anchor yourself, I get it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think I talked about this on the Skeleton Crew show that I did with David Fagiani on the Scapegoat. It's as you say, and it's also, again, I'm pretty sure there's been studies of this, but it happened. You know, it was something that was observed during World War II, right? Whether it's civilians or soldiers, people who were near death, you know, physically near to death, saw someone die very close to them or whatever. One of the things that could happen under some circumstances was a sudden, very powerful increase in sex drive. Like
it's well documented,
right? It's not universal. It's not a universal experience, but it's something that happens to a certain percentage of the population, right?
And a significant one. It is well documented in psychology. Absolutely. It really is. Funerals make us want sex. That is a it's a cliche almost, but it's a cliche because it's absolutely true. Closeness to death, to mortality, makes us want something life-affirming, and there's very little more life-affirming for those of us who enjoy it.
I think you could also probably make an evolutionary biology argument for it, right?
You probably could.
I think there's probably something happening on a lizard brain hormonal level as well, right? Potentially, anyway.
Absolutely.
And again, it's not universal. It's prevalent, right? And as you say, a significant percentage of people that will be enough that it's kind of documented, and it's, you know.
Yeah, well, so I think it's documented, and it's also mythologized. We know it on a visceral level. It's Eros and Thanatos, right? I mean, twin sides of the same coin. Sex and death. It's what motivates us, man. You know.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things where and because of that, I think it feels. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? In the novella, I really do feel like King is reaching very hard for a psychological realism with that scene.
I do too.
I think he's trying to reflect that. Either. It's not erotic, and actually,
it's not erotic.
It's kind of awkward, actually.
Yeah,
because
she says a different name.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. I mean, that's just.
I like that, and he's totally fine about that because he knows he gets the politics of this situation. Yeah, it is not like an act of love. No. It is not an act of affection. No, it is functional.
Yeah, it's two animals performing a function for each other, right?
Yeah. It's totally functional. He's thinking about his wife, of course.
Yeah.
Who he is absolutely certain is dead at that point. He's eternally, he said that. His son keeps asking him, you know, do you think mommy's okay? And he lies to him. He says, you know, I'm sure she is. Internally, he says no. Yeah. No, she's gone.
But I think as well and I think it's a great scene in the book, and I'm equally happy that it's not in the movie. It doesn't need to be in there, and I think
it would complicate the movie in a way that I don't think would work for it somehow. You get a
cool is
sense
that?
of something between them. You
Yeah,
get
yeah.
a sense of something, like an attraction, maybe.
But that's cool, and that's all it needs. And how cool is it, by the way, that you have a Hollywood adaptation that takes out a sex scene as opposed to like gratuitously, especially, by the way, a movie produced by the fucking Weinstein. So, you know,
Jesus.
Well done. I mean, I'm assuming that would have been Darabont with his hand on the tiller, just saying, "No, fuck you.
So.
This is the movie I'm making."
There are quite a few decisions he makes like that, where he just truncates certain things, or he makes motivations a little more clearer. You know, and I love that. I really love that. I think it really does help this version of the story along a little bit.
It also modernizes the story just subtly, but it makes it clear that it's not taking place in the 80s, but it is taking place in the 2000s.
Of course, yes.
And I like that. And he doesn't overplay that. It just because it doesn't need much. It's just a little bit. I tell you, one of my favorite lines, I think it's so clever that he writes, is when he has the soldier and the woman who works on the till, and they've clearly had a will they won't they kind of thing going on, and we're coming in the last scene basically. But when she says, it's such a brilliant line, are you scared about going over there? And it's so brilliant because it's like, at the time it was written, it was obviously about Iraq, but
of course,
the brilliance of writing that line that vaguely is, it's a line tragically that will resonate no matter what year you watch it. There's always somewhere there that guy's going to be sent to, you know? And that's actually a brilliant bit of writing that's really fucking intelligent, because what it does is it simultaneously, as it's written, it grounds the movie in a specific moment, but it also actually gives it an echo of timelessness. Because one of the things so this time watching the black and white version on the DVD or the Blu-ray, there's a short introduction by Darabont. And he talks about why a black and white version. And he's very kind about the color version. He likes the color version too, but his preference was always for black and white. And he says it's specifically because black and white is slightly unreal already. And he likes that sense of heightened reality. He talks about how King describes the mist as a creature feature, and he does in the notes. Weirdly, he talks about the end of the novella in the notes as Skeleton Crew. He says it's like you've gone to the. I can imagine you with your arm around your guy or gal sitting in the drive-in watching it in black and white on a big screen.
Yeah.
He says, and then you decide what the second feature is. You know, now he's talking about the end of the novella being open-ended, right? He's saying, right, you know, I mean, almost you go write it. You know what I mean? Like, you go work it out for yourself. Imagine your own ending. Like, that's fine. But I love how, you know, Darabont took that and also said, actually, that's the fucking movie needs to be black, because it is. It's evoking the 50s creature features that King was partly alongside Lovecraft is the other massive influence, right, on the myth, clearly. Stuff that Richie Towser will later eulogize about in It. But this is King having a go at it in prose form. That's where the pterodactyl comes from. You can almost imagine a Harryhausen version of that, can't you?
Absolutely, a stop motion version, or even like a 3D version with the glasses, right? Absolutely, absolutely.
So
there is a drive-through quality to it, even though it's very smart, even though it's not sort of tongue-in-cheek at all. I mean, it's very dark. It's very dark, but it does still maintain that, doesn't it?
It's dark, but it's sincere. That's what I love about it. Because for me, the classic scene, you mentioned it earlier, the classic line read is the guy who bursts in the door and says, you know, there's something in the mist. It took, what's his name? And the way he delivers that is just, it's so straight down the fucking line. It's big.
It just feels like a guy doing it. You know what I mean? Like someone would. It feels very, very real. It feels very sincere. And I love that.
It feels like a classic 50s horror movie moment.
Yeah, it's almost like it's them, isn't it? You know, it's like it's the little girl shrieking them at the screen, and
it's
absolutely
the closing shot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Any of that, it's absolutely fucking brilliant, and it's both of them. This is what I love. It's both at the same time. It's completely sincere. It's completely naturalistic. It's also completely aware of the heritage of that moment, and it doesn't sell it short. It's a fucking big moment, and it's like, I'm just going to do it. And he does it big. The actor does it big. He doesn't try and do anything clever, postmodern. There's no wink to the fucking audience. He just does it, and he's got the blood running down his nose and the thing. And it's great. It's great, and it works. The thing is, it works. You get that visceral moment, even if you've seen it before. You get that, oh shit,
Oh,
you know, and
this
then of
is
course,
it, right?
right, and then of course you get the fucking air raid siren, which again, the
Again, I
genius
mean,
of that.
the genius of that is wonderful. And again, the Silent Hill thing, right? That's
Right.
what happens when the mist rolls in Silent Hill. The
Right.
air raid siren goes off. It's like
Right.
when the world is transitioning from the mist world to the dark world. It's sort of this is clearly where it came from. It's clearly when you listen, when you read the novella and when you watch the film, it's clearly where Hideo Kojima got the idea from.
But also
for Silent Hill.
Right, but also think about the place of the air raid siren specifically in the American psyche. The air raid siren is the fucking sound of the end of the world. Because what it means is the Russians have launched and you have 30 minutes to get to the shelter.
Yes.
Right? And that's ingrained, especially in King's generation. My God, that is... That I guarantee you, anytime someone from King's generation hears an air raid siren in anything, they get goosebumps. They might not even know why, but that's why. Because if you were a child of America in that era, then it's in your fucking DNA. It's baked into you. It's terrifying.
You
and I
can't
think
help
even
it,
no, and I think I've kind of absorbed it by cultural osmosis, right? Because obviously I'm not a child of that era, but I've read enough about that era, and we had When the Wind Blows, shit like, you know, we had our own.
We were still bombarded with it. We got the tail end of it, didn't we?
Right.
We got the tail end of it. We were transitioning more into the slower apocalypses, you know, the climate change and whatnot. But it was still there.
Oh, we caught the tail end of it for sure. Yeah, and you know, my childhood. I mean, I've talked about that. You know, that's why the Finite is the Finite, because that was me kind of processing that childhood horror as best I could. And so the use of an air raid siren, but what I love is, again, it's doing that dual duty. There's a symbolism to it. There's a schlock kind of 50s, specifically kind of 50s retrograde kind of shout out thing to it, but at the same time, in the moment, it's completely sincere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, no one, again, there's no nod to the camera. There's no like, fucking hell, it's just like the 50s. No one does anything like that. Everyone shits their fucking pants because they know.
They just freeze, don't they? They just freeze. They don't know quite what to do.
No, because the world's about to end and no one can remember where the fucking shelter is. No, it's so good.
It is so good. One of the biggest moments of horror I got this time round was and I don't know why, because it's so overt, it's so clear that this is the case. It's when I think it's Ollie points out that the store's made of glass.
Oh, it's so good! What a great moment. Yeah,
because the protagonist doesn't get it, does he? He's sort of like, oh, we shut it out. We shut the shutters. It doesn't matter. You know, it's out there. It's fine. And Ollie's like, it's made of glass.
The entire front of the building is made of glass.
Yeah.
And what's great then is like David's reaction, like Thomas Jane playing David. His oh shit face in that moment is wonderful,
isn't it great?
It's a superb bit of script. Because again, like, you could put more in the script, but you don't need to. If you know actors, you don't need to write a lot of lines. Just let the guy react to it. It's wonderful. We haven't spoken actually about Toby Jones as Ollie.
Toby Jones as Ollie. I mean, where did that come from, right?
I don't know. I mean, we mentioned it's a great cast, and it is. There isn't a weak link in the cast. It's one of those movies. But even that, Toby Jones. I mean, I love it.
I mean, Toby's great in everything. He brings gravitas and profundity to almost everything he does. And for him to be playing like a bag boy, he's the bag boy in the supermarket.
Good. Yeah.
But also has these hidden depths, where he's also this incredible marksman, right?
I love that.
I love that too. And also he's one of the few characters who's got real grit as well.
Here's the thing
he understands the situation in a way most of the other characters don't. And he understands so early on.
Yes.
Early on. But nothing matters anymore. So he tells his boss to shut the fuck up, when
they're drinking a beer, right? And it's like, I mean, I love the relationship with his boss too, because that's a classic kind of the pettiness of the store manager. Again, the small town thing. King, when he doesn't like someone, he really doesn't like someone, and he, again, I'm sure he's had a really shitty experience. I mean, he worked a lot of shitty jobs, right? Yes. He must have had experience of that. The fucking petty king of this shitty little kingdom managers that are just actually, it crops up again in Mr. Mercedes. He has that. It got developed in the TV show as well. There's the manager of the murderer in Mr. Mercedes, the classic king, petty tyrant guy. You actually hate him more than you hate the murderer. He's so petty and awful. But I love that relationship between the two of them, where, because you're right, Ollie's actually he's the assistant manager. So but like But here's the character that I love, right? That his manager, who is this officious prick, who's like, I'm going to write your name down for drinking a beer at the end of the world. Like, fuck you.
Yeah.
And also because he's not bright enough to realize yet it's the end of the world, right? That's the subtext of that scene. It's like Ollie's like
either that. He's either not. I mean, it is that he's not smart enough, but also he's like falling back on the only thing, certain thing he has in his life. So it's sort of like, my God, you know, it's another sort of misanthropic commentary, isn't it? That like at the end of the world, this is what you are. There
will still be a fucking petty bureaucrat saying, I'm going to report you for drinking beer on duty. Yeah,
that's abjection.
True. That's
misanthropy. That makes you ultimately. That makes anyone who is not that want to just throw open the doors and say, you know what, let them in.
But that's someone. That's someone who's built the prison inside their own mind, right? That's someone. Yeah. It's just it's really upsetting. But what I love is. Right, yeah, he's just like, my God, you realize you've only got one of these, right? Lives, right? You understand this is it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what you want to do. Okay, interesting. But what I love about that is you think about that kind of character. The Bud Brown is the name of the manager. But you think about it's David Brent, right? And he's not played for laughs, but it is that petty kind of. But you think about that guy. Think about that kind of character. One of the things those people will pride themselves on always is how much their employees respect them and how they have a personal relationship with them, right? And he has no fucking idea that his assistant manager was an expert marksman in 1990. Actually won medals for it in 94. Yeah. Not a fucking clue. Literally laughs in his face when he says, I can shoot a gun.
Yeah, he has a very preconceived idea of who Ollie is, right?
Yeah. Because on that, and the reason for that is because Ollie doesn't trust him as far as he can fucking throw him, so he's never told him anything about himself.
Yeah, he doesn't like him, right?
Exactly, because he's a dick.
It's also, so I mean, like, again, the casting of Toby Jones helps here because he looks unassuming. You wouldn't think it of him. You wouldn't think that he's like an expert marksman or that he's won competitions or whatever. And then, of course, it turns out that actually he has. And also, again, sadly, ignominious end for Ollie, right?
Really sad, really, really upsetting. But I mean, appropriately so for the kind of movie that they're making and the kind of story that's being told. But yeah, it is
upsetting. A relationship with Ollie, you know, as an audience member. He's a nice guy. He's a decent character, and is just ignominiously snatched up by one of the less defined creatures.
Oh, it's so
from
wonderful.
The mist. It's weird. Well, the way that thing is vile. Whatever it is.
It's kind of it's either the same one or like in the same species, right, as the one that takes the sacrificed soldier, right?
Yeah, it's like a crab.
It's like this weird kind of
big and gangly, and like it almost has like a torso on it. It's very unpleasant.
But I was also thinking about how the movie, I mean, that monster's an exemplar of it, but the movie kind of does a great job of having its cake and eating it when it comes to the monsters. Because one of the things that King talks about, I think in Dance Macabre, is that I know I've riffed on this before, but it's a good riff. That thing about why a novel's better than a movie is because sooner or later you've got to open the door, and in a movie when you open the door and the people see a 50-foot monster, they always breathe a sigh of relief because they imagined it was going to be 100-foot, right? What I love about The Mist is it is a creature feature, and fucking hell does it deliver. The creature design in this thing is exquisite. I love the way the spider faces look like skulls.
They look like skulls, right?
Like angry skulls, like skulls that want you to suffer. And then
they look slightly humanoid, don't they? They've got like teeth, like a human's teeth, as well as the mandibles,
and so do the kind of giant fucking whatever they are, wasp, hornet things, and so do the
scorpion things. Yeah.
So you get these deliveries of moments of incredible detail in the creatures, which I can't speak to the color version, but they look amazing in black and white for sure.
They're great, honestly. I mean, again, it's one of the things that amazes me. It could have so easily killed this.
Yeah.
If they were not right, if they were not convincing, then that would have been it. That would have been it. No, they look great. They look absolutely great. They look fairly real. You know, there's something about them. They look fairly real.
But also, I think part of the genius is part of the reason they work is, and again, it's the strengths of the storytelling. They are meant to be uncanny. They're not meant to be naturalistic. So I think that does give the animators a little bit of breathing room, doesn't it?
they're extra dimension from some other state of reality, so you get some breathing room there.
Yeah, I think so.
But I love the way the story, both versions of the story actually, but it's particularly unpleasant when you see it, I think.
Yeah.
They go into the detail about like the biology of these creatures, so their life cycles.
Right.
The spiders, when they take people and cocoon people, and then
I mean, sure, it's a riff on Alien, but fucking hell.
Absolutely, but bloody hell, right? That's a fear. I mean, it's actually a common myth. It's a common myth that the parasitic spider that lays its eggs in people's skin. There's no such thing. There is no such thing. There is no spider on Earth that does that. But it's playing into that fear, that fundamental.
We've all heard about it on the playground. Some guy went on holiday somewhere exotic and came back. It's a strange lump. It grew.
Bullshit. Might be true of other animals. Might be true of other bugs, but it's not true of spiders. Not true of spiders. No.
But it's such a bone deep fear, right? And it's also like, look, what I love about it as well is it trades on, a real thing about spiders, which is the fact that spiders are cannibals, right? So spiders will often, eat their young or eat their parents or their lover or all three sometimes, like, and that, we find that freaks them for obvious reasons. So it kind of plays on that. So you're right, it's kind of a combination of like a like a playground myth, but also something that we know, enough of what we kind of half know about real spiders, and it just kind of mushes them together. But that, man, it was one of the moments actually, because I was gonna watch this movie with Kiddo and then I didn't in the end, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't. I'm glad I rewatched it myself first, because I watched that and I was like, I don't know how she's gonna deal with this. Because she's got a bit of arachnophobia, and this is pretty fucking intense.
That's like arachnophobia dialed up to 10, isn't it? That's really horrible. They're not just around; they're inside. It's like, oh no.
So here's the thing, right? So the movie delivers those amazing visual moments, and it nails it. Surprisingly, given the technology of the era, absolutely nails it. But it also manages to do the imagination thing also, because like you said earlier, that creature that we see that kills Toby Jones's character and that steals the torso, and you don't ever see that thing properly.
You never see it. You only see its silhouette.
Outline.
You see
and it's
that's it.
And then later on, when they're doing the long drive, and you get that gargantuan fucking whatever the hell it is thing.
That's awe-inspiring, isn't it? Because at that point, they're effectively on safari, right? They may as well have driven into an alien world, and it's a great signifier that this world is taking over. There are now creatures in our world that just can't biologically exist. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and I love the way the actors react, the way the characters react to it, because their reaction is awe.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's what I love about that as well. It's a classic B movie thing, and I like not B movie. What do I mean? Like a classic kind of genre movie trope where they're looking out, they're in total awe, but then also every time the foot of the creature hits the ground, the whole car bounces.
Yes. Great.
So they're sat there with these dumbstruck faces, and then every sort of 4 or 5 seconds they're like leaping up in their seat.
Yeah.
And I love that, and their expressions don't break. And I love that. They're so absorbed that they're not even really recognizing like the physical reality.
Maybe not even afraid anymore at that moment, in that instant. It's the Jurassic Park thing, isn't it?
It's the Brontosaurus. It's a wonderful.
It evoked that moment. It's brilliant. It's utterly brilliant.
No, it's so good. And they kind of, it's like they almost forget to be scared because it's so kind of mind-buggering what they're staring at.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that's the anti-Lovecraft for me. That's where King transcends Lovecraft, because he allows himself and his characters to feel the awe of the strange and the disturbing and the surreal, because there is something naturally miraculous about it. Wherever there's a monster, there's a miracle, right?
Absolutely.
I kind of love that. That, and you need it in the film version. You need it because of what follows. And I want to get to that because the differences in the ending are significant. Before we do, I just want to loop back very briefly to Norton, because the other thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about the different versions of the character. But again, so obviously the writing's different, and that's down to Darabont, but also the casting. I think the decision to cast the actor that they cast for Norton, who sadly recently passed away,
Yeah, Andre, I can't remember how to pronounce his surname. Broja, or he was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine for the entire run of that show. Did very well in there. I first saw him in Homicide: Life on the Streets, which was David Simon's pre-The Wire show, and he was phenomenal in that as this detective working in Baltimore, and he was just amazing screen presence. Just every screen he was in, every scene he was in, he dominated. And he had very few lines often, because his character was a man of few words, but extraordinary presence. And to cast that, the genius of casting that guy as Norton is you immediately complicate the character in all kinds of really useful ways.
Because you could have so easily, if you were Darabont, you could have gone for one of those actors who plays that kind of character. Who plays like the scumbag, effectively. Because they're, actors specialize in exactly that. They have a particular look and a particular way about them.
It's 2008. Andy Quaid hasn't gone nuts yet. Just cast him. He's looking for work after Independence Day. He hasn't done anything for a little while. Cast him. As the novella version of the character, he'd have been perfect. He'd have
got the scumminess of Nort.
But this guy's totally different. He's buttoned down, and also like the racial dimension, right? He's a black guy who's an outsider in small town America.
In small town, very white America, very conservative.
He changes the way the character is going to approach the situation. Completely changes the dynamics in the store, but also just even with the neighbor. And it brilliantly because you remember you said how like the difference between the novella version and the movie version is you kind of have a lot of sympathy with the movie version when he decides to leave. Well, that's part of why.
Yeah. Because definitely.
He's definitely looking at them being like, oh, I get it. Yeah. I get what this is. I get it. Right. You were pretending to be my friend, but it was just so you could set me up with this bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the thing is, when he says that, you kind of look at the way he's been on screen the whole time, and you think about what's implied of the history between the two, and you're like, oh, okay, I understand you completely. I understand everything about what's gotten you to this point. And it's brilliant because like he's not necessarily a bad person in any fucking way.
No, and you get that. You get that at the very end of him, don't you? When he has that moment where it's like, well, if you were right, the joke will be on me, won't it?
The other moment I love with his character in the movie, and it almost couldn't have happened in the novella, I don't think, is when his kid says, "Can I go into the store?" and he just says, "Well, yeah, I guess if you if you hold his hand." And he just looks at him and he's like, and that's silent communication. Is that okay? He's like, yeah, okay. And it's lovely. It's just a lovely moment. And again, it's like you can't imagine a novella guy. You're like, oh, my hand, fuck that. I love it because what I love about it in the movie is because you feel like at that point in the narrative, you feel like it's almost setting up like like a subplot that's going to be almost like a buddy movie with these two alienated or semi-alienated neighbors are reconciled through the crisis, and that would have been a nice counterpoint to the people turn to shit under pressure story that's also happening, or people fall for demagoguery when they're afraid, if we're going to be more nuanced about it, which is the like the A plot. You start to think as a storyteller, as a viewer, like, oh well, that'd be a really interesting beat, and then you think, how could that play out? Is he going to end up, is Nort going to end up being some kind of horrific kind of black savior, sacrificial lamb to let the white people escape? Or like, there's all kinds of ways it could play out. And I love how, and then the movie kind of shifts on you again and it does something different. You're like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. And it's rare for me, especially in a disaster movie, where you can have a character make what is objectively a bad decision and have it feel intellectually justified.
Normally, absolutely. Well, it isn't condemning him for it.
Yeah.
That's normally the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Normally there's a scene you have to swallow where someone just acts in a certain way. You're just like, no one, like, that's so fucking dumb. Yeah. But this one, like, you get it. It makes sense why that character's doing it. And you can, like you say, that last scene's so great because you can almost see him warring with himself. Like, have I actually judged this wrong? Have I judged these people wrong? And then whatever past experience it is that's led him to make that conclusion, he just can't do it.
can't. No, he can't deviate, can he? He's
No.
made the decision, and I mean, the other thing that the film does is it removes Naught's history. In the book, there's all this stuff about his wife and the way he used to treat her. He is just a scumbag. He's irredeemable in the book. Here, that's not there.
Yeah,
that's not there at all.
And I love that. I just love, and I think that's one of those things where, I love both versions of the story, but that's where, for me, Darabont, as a writer in his own right, you know what I mean, as the writer of the movie version of this, played an absolute blinder, I think.
Yeah,
really,
and of
really
course,
intelligent stuff.
The big one is the end, of course.
Well, there you go, which leads us neatly back to the biggest difference between the two narratives, which is
violence. The end of the film is violent. It is, and I don't mean like the subject is violent. I mean it's violent towards its audience.
It's violent to the soul. I mean, it hurts.
It actually does. It's one I have very rarely encountered cinema that makes you feel like you've been assaulted, that makes you feel like you've been harmed by it. The very few examples I can think of, Last House on the Left does it.
Yes.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre does it to a certain degree.
A particular sequence in Hellbound, I would suggest.
Yeah, definitely.
Stuck on a mattress. That's
edging
into territory. But
that conclusion is so brutal.
It's really interesting rewatching it tonight. It's almost too much. The moment where he says, "I've only got 4 bullets," you do kind of think, "Oh, fuck off." But then, brilliantly, you remember Toby Jones firing 2 shots. Yeah. And it is a 6-shooter. Yeah. So actually, he did set that up. Fair play again, Mr. Darabont. Well played, sir.
Yeah,
you did give us that information already.
It is literally Chekhov's gun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the film really does make a point of showing you that Ollie drops the gun on the hood of the car when he's plucked up.
Well, and David takes a huge personal risk to grab it, right?
To grab it, right. And you have to wonder, like, what's his motivation at that point? Is it protection, or is he projecting forward? Is he thinking, well, if this doesn't work out?
Because he's got the promise he made to his kid ringing in his ears, right? Daddy, this has to be this has to be, I can't remember how the kid says it, but like, this has to be the biggest promise.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, don't let the monsters get me.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And I got to tell you, I mean, as a parent, I don't do this very often, but as a parent, watching that scene, that exchange of dialogue, it's just a fucking claw hammer to the soul.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know what's coming, but especially if you do, because it's like, oh yeah, because like, I mean, obviously, we talked about it earlier, the Finite. That was my version of that, right? That was something that was my way of trying to process that as a parent of a then very young child, and just knowing what horrors the world are capable of inflicting, and trying to make sense of it, trying to make sense of like, what are your responsibilities as a parent, what are your and it is, if your love for this creature that you brought into the world is essentially bottomless, what does that actually mean?
Where are you prepared to go? Like,
exactly.
What extremes?
And
this is fucking extreme.
And under what circumstances? Exactly. What are those circumstances? Where are those lines? Are there those lines? And it's great, because as soon as the kid says that, you get this kind of really strong sinking feeling of like, oh Jesus. And the way the guy responds as well, the way that that Thomas Jane as David responds, that he understands the weight of what's being said there. Maybe better than the kid does. And oh Jesus, it's so rough.
It's that wonderful thing. You've got several generations in the car as well at the end, which is really clever. It's really clever, because you see the differing horror that this represents to each of them. So for the older generations, of course, the two in the back, it's that it's over. It's that this is the end. This is how it ends. There's no peace. Ultimately, this is it. And for the younger people, it's like, we haven't even lived. We haven't had anything. This
wasn't in the script. This is not the story. This is bullshit. Yeah. It's wonderful. And it like the film just there's no part as well. There is no moment where the film shows the slightest fucking moment of mercy either. Like it can't
It's merciless. It's absolutely bloody merciless.
It cannot even leave the kid sleeping.
No, he wakes up, doesn't he? He sees it, shows you him seeing.
You see those eyes open and the pupils dilate, and you're just like, oh, fuck you.
The only mercy it gives you is drawing out of the car before the shot. That's the only mercy, but it's not much of one.
It really ain't. Because it's the 4 shots, and you even see the silhouette of the woman fall back, and you're just like, oh, you fucking son of a bitch.
Yeah,
it's so brutal.
It's absolutely vicious. And then to double it up, so it's already punched you to the ground.
Yeah.
It's already punched you to the ground.
And that moment, by the way, where, again, Thomas Jane, who's amazing as the lead, by the way. We haven't talked about him, but he's spectacular.
Amazing in this. He is absolutely amazing. And it's these moments where he really gets to shine.
Well, this is the thing. Like, he is the everyman holding his shit together. He's like fucking Bruce Willis in Die Hard, only without the wisecracking for like 95% of the movie. And then you get this scene, and you're like, oh no, it's all going on. It's all going on the whole time under the surface. The moment when he puts the fucking gun in his mouth and dry fires it like 4 or 5 times while he's screaming, and you're just like, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean that's evidence of the godlessness of this universe, isn't it? That there, if there was a god, they'd have at least put a bullet in there, right? At the very least.
And the way he says, "I'll figure something out," you know.
Yeah. And then that double bluff where it sounds like something is coming,
and for a second it looks like it, right? The shape emerges in the mist,
and it's humanity, and the mist recedes.
Yeah.
So seconds, just seconds. If they hadn't gone as far.
Hey, you want a real mind fuck? If they'd just driven in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
They've been driving away from their salvation the entire fucking time.
Yeah.
It's been trundling towards them.
Yeah.
If they just fucking sat still.
I mean, Darabont could have been a real bastard at that point. He could have made it so that some of the people from the store were in those trucks. You know, that would have been a real.
I mean, to be fair, he's gone back to the lake. We can assume maybe that wouldn't have worked. Maybe it would have been further along the road. But it's still like, oh my god, when you see the woman who ran out, with her kids,
wow.
Oh. Yeah,
and the look on his face, because there is like he almost gets the cosmic joke of it at that point.
Yeah. Just thinking about that meme. This is how I became the Joker. I mean, it is just like, fuck off,
talk about the one bad day, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, in his case, I guess he's going to be the screamer instead, by the looks of things. But I mean, it's just, and like you say, the as if it weren't brutal enough. The fact that as the tanks drive past and the flamethrowers are going, the mist is lifting. And to me, what's fascinating about that is it's almost the implication of that to me is almost that the mist is actually produced by the creatures.
Yeah.
And that if you kill all the creatures, then the mist dissipates because it's something atmospheric that is produced by their biology.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, wow. Like a built-in camouflage or whatever, or just match the way that creature or the creatures from that dimension process oxygen even, right? It could be something as simple as that. It could just be a byproduct of how their bodies adapt to our atmosphere maybe, but just extraordinary. And again, purely visual bit of storytelling. There's no explanation given. You're left to work it out or think about it.
And I love the implications of both versions of the story. The implication of the short story is that it's over. It's done. Humanity's over. It's finished. The implication of the film, not so much, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing with the film. It's so nihilistic. Oh yeah, humanity survives, but do you want to? Does it matter at this point? Knowing what you know now, and this can happen again. Of course, you don't know what the ultimate implications of the end of the film are. I mean, this could be temporary, this reprieve. They could be traveling in a little pocket of clean air, you know? The mist could come back. And there's no saying that whatever the Arrowhead project pour open isn't still there.
And I reserve the right to be inherently nervous about any kind of future liberation that comes down the barrel of the American military industrial complex, because I mean their track record's not flawless. Let's just put it like that.
Isn't. No,
it's not completely without merit either. I mean, the Marshall Plan was pretty good, right? Like they had the moments, but it has been a while.
Yeah,
and there's quite a lot in the deficit column in the meantime.
And of course, the film really doesn't paint them as saviors as such. They're not. No. They haven't saved anything here.
No, no, not in this moment. Haven't.
Not in this moment. It's too late. It's done. Nor humanity is never going to recover from this.
It's just brutal. It's absolutely brutal, and quite extraordinary. And I think too, it
leaves you feeling so empty and hurt.
I mean, if you really want it, though, I guess you could see it as a kind of almost like an Old Testament rejection of the notion of suicide, right? Because
I suppose you could see it that way.
And I don't think this was the intention, to be clear, but I do think it's interesting that if you wanted to, you could read it as a surprisingly compelling moral argument about literally fight to your last breath. Don't fucking give up ever, no matter how bleak it looks. And that's quite as I say, quite Old Testament, quite Catholic, quite hardcore position. That's quite a tough kind of, it's almost like Book of Job shit. It's quite intense.
It really is. And it's anti-logic as well, isn't it? That's what's really interesting. Yeah, because logically, he makes the right decision. That's the worst thing.
That's why I don't think it's intentional that it's written. That's why I don't think that's an intentional lesson baked into it. Because I think it's designed from the writing perspective to be an expression of the hell of logical consequences, actually. I think the guy makes the right decision with the information he has available to him, and it's the wrong decision.
I don't think there's any other. To be honest, I don't think there's any other decision they could
make. Right? There's 4 fucking adults in that car, and they all look at each other, and they don't have to say a word.
Yeah,
they just all they want to know is how many bullets are left in the gun, because they fucking know.
They know, right? They know, and what else are they gonna do?
Right. So it's not like he goes crazy and fucking kills them all. No. Do you know what I mean? Like they're grateful, and they're like, sorry, there's not 5 bullets.
It's not a product of paranoia or even irrationality.
No,
it's completely down the line. It is completely rational.
And that's the brilliance of it, is that it's just that thing of like the hell that we can create for ourselves with the best of intentions, right?
Yeah.
It's just fantastic. Super.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's a great thing for a horror film to do. To have those balls on it. To have those balls on it.
After everything else, by the way, because this is a film that's got a lot of chops all the way through and all the ways you described. And it just, to cap it that way, it's so brutal.
It is. And I really like it. I'll be honest. I really, really like it. I think it's a very brave decision. I'm not sure which I prefer, because I like the resonant implication of the novella.
Yeah,
I love the ending of the novella, where it leaves it up to the audience to decide what happens, and you determine the significance of it. I think that's really cool. But the brutality of the film, I really enjoy.
And it's genuinely hard to watch.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those things where you just kind of think, like, it's one of those things, for me, amongst other things, it's one of those moments that lays bare the kind of insanity of a film classification system, because The Mist is certified as a 15.
I know, that's bonkers, isn't it?
And it's like
bonkers. How do you? I mean, like, what?
It's like, this is like just one of the bleakest moments in cinema, right? It's just one of the most devastating, and it's like, it just goes to show, like, the obsessions of what we consider to be images and ideas that should be censored and should not be, that we fundamentally just, like, I can't imagine what the psychological impact of watching this at 15 might be.
Right. You know what the really upsetting thing is? If it had the sex scene in it, it would be an 18.
Well, there you go, right? Like, what does that say?
What does that say about us, right? Ridiculous. What does that say about certification in and of itself? It's absurd, isn't it?
It is absurd because like this movie should have like a, I don't know, like a 78 certificate or something for that last thing. Like
it should definitely have a warning. I mean, anyone
like,
who hasn't seen it and doesn't
ready
know,
for this.
no, anyone who hasn't seen it and doesn't really know the story, I would definitely like stamp massive content warnings on this, because it goes to places. It really goes to places that your average creature feature does not.
Yeah, and I love the courage of that. And I mean, it's a petty thing in the grand scheme of things, but watching it makes me furious all over again that this guy got dumped off of The Walking Dead after the first season, because you just look at that and you think, imagine what a guy with that level of imagination could have done with the fucking Walking Dead if they just let him get on with it. Because that first season is brilliant.
Oh, it's awesome. The first season is awesome, and then it kind of falls off a cliff, doesn't it? It just
and
sort of like
if you just trusted that guy, look at that scene and tell me this guy doesn't know how to do The Walking Dead. Like, shut the fuck up. Just give him the money. Get the fuck out of his way.
Let him do it. He's a great storyteller, Frank Darabont. He's a great director.
It's astonishing.
And I kind of wish he did more. He's that kind. He's that guy, And
I wish he did more King. I mean, I'd love to see Darabont's version of Needful Things. Like, I think he could actually do that justice. You know what I mean? Like it. Fun. Yeah. And
I mean, the 90s like TV version is fun. It's great. It's fine.
Sure. It's okay.
It's not amazing by any stretch. It has all the problems that a 90s King adaptation has.
It was a fairly decent cast, wasn't it? Ed Harris and
Leland Gaunt is it's
that guy from that thing.
It's
someone actually famous, isn't it? It's one
of The Exorcist, the priest.
Right. Yeah.
What's his name? Oh, it's gone.
Anyway,
it's on the tip. It's on the it's floating in my mind. But yes, huge actor. Really significant. It's fun. The 90s adaptation. Sure. It's oddly fun.
But can you imagine like a 8 or 10 episode like one season?
Yeah.
Needful Things.
Like a streaming series now.
Right. That would just fucking rock so hard.
I would love to see. I mean, I'm sure I remember reading somewhere that the Langoliers is being redone. There is a new version of the Langoliers in production. How you do that story and make it work, I don't really know, but
I don't know.
Let's see.
As well, this might be an old-fashioned kind of feeling, but maybe like you don't have to film everything. Something,
Absolutely. And I mean, King has kind of disowned the Langoliers. He kind of says that he wouldn't write like that again.
Yeah,
because it's it's not his favorite.
It's like it's a funny thing as I've reflected more and more on the car crash that is It Chapter 2. The more I've thought about.
I dislike it more and more,
Yeah, and I still enjoying one for what it was, but, but thinking about the source material and being like, as a kid, I was completely convinced that this story was unfilmable, and that was part of what I liked about it. Because the thing about it's the style of the storytelling and the historical spread and all the different voices and all the different and the fact that it is so fucking long.
Yeah, it's huge.
Deliberately so. It's like, it's almost like 100 short horror stories bolted together into this massive meta-narrative. It's an extraordinary piece of work. And you just think, we don't actually have to fucking point a camera at everything and try and make it work. No. Sometimes, like, I don't see how you could make a version of it in cinema, even if you wanted to, that would be better than the fucking novel. And kind of what's the point?
Right.
What's great about The Mist is it's made by someone in the persona of Darabont that both understands and adores the source material.
Yes.
And understands storytelling and cinema and how it works.
Yes.
And he gets it. And part of the reason he picks The Mist is because it is cinematic. It has that 50s creature feature vibe, as King talks about in the afterword. So it's already baked into the premise. And then he understands how you adapt the story to make it work. He understands what you cut. He understands what you change. He understands how to update it in the most basic way so that it's current, but it doesn't intrude on the narrative as a whole. And and you end up with one of my favorite King novellas, which means one of my favorite novellas of all time, and one of my favorite horror movies.
Yeah. It's a corker. It really is. There's something about it. There's a quality about it that is so evocative of the original novella, and yet also so powerfully its own.
That's what's so great about it. Yeah.
I remember seeing it for the first time and being blown away by it. I was like, no way. I was very cynical.
Yeah.
Hearing that it was being adapted because, oh no, horror films were not in a good place either. Mainstream horror was not in a good place when The Mist came out. The fact that Darabont was attached was a big plus.
Sure.
But the fear of them messing it up was enormous, absolutely enormous, and it became a favorite. It's a film I'll return to. Very, very. It's difficult to watch because it's so horrible, but it is a film I will return to. And before we come to a conclusion, the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
my God,
soundtrack
Host
and
of Seraphim.
sound. Yeah. No,
Host
it's
of
wonderful.
Seraphim. I listen to that often, just as a piece of music, because I think it is exquisite. I think it's beautiful. It's I've described it as it's like an elegy for a dying world, isn't it? It's like the angels looking down and saying, "What have you done? What have you done?" It's really stunning. It's beautiful and beyond melancholic. It's a dirge, isn't it? It's so sad. It's not scary. It's sad. It's sorrowing. It's elegiac.
Yeah, I think it's also the emotion. It's the music of profound sort of shock and grief.
Yeah.
A grief so profound it has become a shock. It's that state of, well, it's the state of seeing reality in a state other than you've known it to be, right?
Yeah, and other than it should be, right?
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Host of Seraphim is the perfect soundtrack for this film, particularly its latter quarters.
No, it's exquisite bit of scoring, and alongside that, I would say also the sound design, which often gets overlooked. I think the sound design is exquisite as well. The creature noises and sounds, sounds in The Mist. Even when you don't see anything, it sets your skin crawling. It's really, really brilliant stuff.
That's a big feature of the short story. Of course, people hear things more than they see things. And that's fabulous. That's absolutely fabulous. And it captures it beautifully. Captures it just stunningly. Because again, it could have so easily been too much one way or the other, and it just hits it right. It just hits it perfectly.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's spectacular. But again, I think it's one of those movies where, miraculously every single element of the movie is working. Is working in concert to create this, everything from the direction, the writing, the cast, the sound design, the editing, the individual camera work is exquisite. The use of camera, we didn't mention this, but there's one of the things I love is the way the camera positioning evokes the claustrophobia really cleverly by, you get these occasional shots from outside the store, but they're only just outside. And they're looking through the windows and you see the cast inside. It's so clever. It's so clever the way it uses angles, the way it uses obviously the mist itself, the way, especially in the black and white version, it uses light and shade. It's so intelligent, it's so impressive, and it's all pulling in the same direction. It's all creating this sense of atmosphere of just dread, and fear and tension, just feeling you cannot relax. So good.
On a technical level, it's just so competent. It's so well put together. And again, not to be too old man about it, but it was rare in cinema of that era.
Sure.
In horror cinema of that era.
And again, just to hit it one more time, it's not afraid to do the big horror movie set piece stuff either. And when it does get it, it doesn't try and be all fucking clever and slow-mo or hyper cutting, or it doesn't fall into any of those bullshit traps. It just fucking does it.
It just goes for it, doesn't it? It's just visceral, you feel and horrible.
And for me, it's like, you talked about the spider sequence. I felt like I felt the way I felt watching certain scenes in The Thing, which I haven't got a higher compliment for a horror movie than that.
No,
Just absolutely. That visceral feeling of holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
And some of that's in what they do, and some of it's in what they don't do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they, you don't get those massive string hits to fucking give you a jump scare. You do not need it, because when you see that fucking thing come out of the wall, or that thing, like, you do all your jumping, but you do not need none of that hokey bullshit. You are terrified when those strands start coming of spiderweb, even if you don't know what they do yet. There's something about them that just absolutely freaks the shit out of you. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. It's beautifully done.
Filmmaking.
Beautiful framing, and I so enjoyed rewatching it for the purpose of this podcast. I really, really enjoyed it.
And for me, like, the thing is, it's, again, I mean, we've said it, but just one more time, it's that combination of a clearly completely deep-rooted and totally sincere love of the source material with a genuine talent for cinema.
Absolutely.
And that combination, and not being afraid to change it up when it needs it, but always paying faith to the spirit of the original story, which every fucking filmmaker that adapts a story pretends they're doing, and most of them aren't. Most of them are ego-driven and trying to do their own version. But with Darabont, you feel like, no, he really fucking loves The Mist. You can tell how much he loves The Mist.
Oh yeah, totally. And
By
King widely, right? He gets King, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, you get little nods in this film to other King.
Oh
things
yeah.
as well, like
well, we started at the Dark Tower, didn't we? But and there's that shot of he's painting the cover of.
He's painting Roland, isn't he?
Painting Roland. Did you see as well in the background? I mentioned it earlier. The thing, it implies that in this universe, this artist is the guy who did that famous poster for The Thing. He's got that painting on his wall as well.
Absolutely brilliant.
So cool. Like, that must have been his first gig out of art school, given his age, but like, it's still really fucking cool. Like, okay.
What first gig, right? What first gig? Of course, probably wouldn't have been paid much, because the thing didn't do very well, obviously, when it first came. Right. Yeah. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But no, I mean, it was a joy getting to revisit this, and really interesting as well. I mean, like, really interesting going back and rereading it and trying to remember where I was and what I was and what the state of mind was when I first read it. It's so interesting. It's always going to be one of the big evocative stories for me, I think, this one.
Yeah, and I get why. And I think, look, I think for me as well, it's one of those kind of ground zero texts for, if you ever have to deal with someone who's trying to convince you that there's a sharp divide between literary horror and pulp horror, and also that literary horror is inherently superior. Like, give them The Mist and just tell them to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, absolutely.
If the Mist doesn't scare the absolute piss out of you on every level, from the baseline visceral right down to the almost spiritual, then there's something wrong with you, because it does it. That's the thing, and it for me, it underlines that the idea, the bullshit behind that idea. Like, no, he had a vision of a pterodactyl crashing through the store window, and he wrote one of the great horror novellas of all time, and it's great on every single level. Yeah, it's great on a visceral pulp level, it's great on a creature feature level, but it's also great on a psychology level, on an emotional level. If you're spiritual, it's great on a spiritual level too. It's fucking astounding. And you come out of it feeling shaken. You come out of it feeling like you've been on on a journey, and you see the world very slightly differently now.
Well, what more could you want from a horror story? Right? I mean,
what do we come to this shit for?
What do you want? Exactly. It's something, we've spoken about this so often. It's something I demand of the fiction that I read these days, or the fiction I consume. And it's so lovely that this it's out there, and it still does it. It still has this emotional freight. Strange thing to feel sentimental about, but
Oh yeah. Well, we're strange people. Let's face it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What the hell is wrong with us, George?
What the hell indeed is wrong with us?
But just to be clear as well, literary horror can be fantastic and can do all those things as well. I'm not anti-literary horror anyway. I'm anti-literary horror snobs. I'm not anti-literary.
It's a weird thing. It's like I never understood the distinction until someone described my work as literary, and I remember it was one of the very first reviews I ever got for Strange Playground, and it was lovely. It was really lovely review. And I remember reading that and thinking, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does that even mean? Because I don't understand that. I don't understand the divide. I literally don't understand the divide. I get it in terms of like marketing categorization, maybe.
That's how I feel about it. Yeah.
In terms of like intention of storytelling or whatever, I don't, it doesn't mean anything to me.
No.
It means not a thing.
No, I agree.
Anywho, well, Kit, that was amazing. I'm so glad we got to do it. I'm so glad we got to do The Mist. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to pimp out?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I talked a few times here, or I talked at the start anyway, about a novella that I've finished writing recently. If you want to get eyes on that, on the first draft of that, before anybody else is going to get anywhere near it, and it is going to be many, many months before that reaches publication, then patreon.com/kitpower. For $1 a month, you get something new every week. Sometimes it will be a podcast, sometimes it will be non-fiction essay or book review, and sometimes, quite often recently, it will be chapters from this novella. So if that interests you, if you want to get in on the ground floor, bearing in mind as well, you'll be reading the first draft, so it's likely that the published version will actually be different. So it really is a kind of Patreon exclusive thing. Yeah, $1 a month gets you something new every week from me, so that's a good place to check that out. If you want to buy books that have already been through an editorial process, which I would respect as well, obviously amazon.com or .co.uk, search under books for Kit Power. All of my titles are there. If you want the ebooks, generally they're Kindle exclusives. If you do want the paperbacks, all of my books have ISBN numbers, so maybe take them to your local book shop if you're still lucky enough to have one, or indeed your library, where that would be wonderful. Podcasting, let's see, well, I'm here quite a lot if you want to check out past episodes. Very often. What the hell is wrong with us? Also, my own feed, watching Robocop with Kit Power, actually currently broadcasting a series on Bruce Springsteen, as you'd expect from a Robocop podcast feed. I probably should update the name at some point. That's with my friend James Murphy. There's also a couple of exclusive podcasts on my Patreon. Oh, I should say as well, if you sign up to the Patreon, not only do you get something new every week for $1 a month, you get instant access to the entire back catalogue, including a Patreon exclusive podcast about Sherlock Holmes, and a couple of episodes I did with my kid about the Discworld novels. So yeah,
fantastic.
All of that stuff. So yeah, find me there basically. So yeah, buy my books, listen to my podcasts, and give me $1 a month if you want to get the good stuff early.
Excellent. As per usual, guys, links to all of that down below. As for myself, I'm here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel. There are loads of videos going up at the moment. There are podcasts like this. There are stuff about Warhammer. There's video game Let's Plays. Currently doing the new Final Fantasy VII Rebirth.
Oh, nice. That's
spectacular. That is absolutely spectacular. It's Final Fantasy VII open world and really queer. It's great.
Sold.
Utterly brilliant. Honestly, it's awe-inspiringly good. Kit neglected to mention, but if you go over to Arrow Films, you know the story already. You know the story. But if you do go over to Arrow Films and you happen to like Hellraiser and Clive Barker and whatnot, go and look at their Quartet of Torment, the new UHD and Blu-ray versions of Hellraiser. We feature on the Hellbound disc on the feature Hell Is What They Wanted. And we're dead, well, so dead proud of that one. I can't tell you, really can't tell you. Yeah, it was such an amazing experience, and we are so pleased with how that's come out. We're not just because we did it, and we're actually it's pretty good, isn't it, kid? It's actually pretty damn good,
like genuinely. I mean, it sounds like we're trying to sell it, but look, here's the truth, right? We've been paid, so we're not actually trying to sell it at all because we've been paid.
We've been paid.
I will say this genuinely, and it's some of my best work, and I think it's some of our best work.
Yeah, I think so. And like,
in the non-fiction field.
Putting that aside, as a Hellraiser fan, that is I would have bought that anyway.
Oh, of course.
As a Hellraiser fan, it's an
100%.
amazing set. It's probably the definitive set, isn't it?
It's likely to be. I think it's likely to. Well, I mean, given the remaster and given the 4K as well, I think it probably is, right? I think this is the definitive set now.
Yeah. Loads of good stuff on there as well. I mean, like hundreds of hours of extras on there, so that's really wonderful. We just happen to feature in them, which is nice. Like Kit, if you go over to Amazon and type in George Daniel Lee, you'll find all of my published work, my short story collections, and the anthologies and collections that I feature in. If you go over to Strange Playgrounds, you'll find links direct to the publishers as well, which might be preferable. I'm still on Twitter at the moment, probably not for very long. And you can also get me on Blue Sky as well. Also, over at Ginger Nuts of Horror, the My Life in Horror series continues at a pace. There's a couple, in fact, there's several articles that are waiting in the wings to come out now. One of them, the subject of which will be very familiar to you, Kit, and probably to your readers as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a listeners of this channel, right?
Yeah, definitely. I tell you, it's a nasty essay, that is. It's really dark. It's very unpleasant. Guys, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back very, very soon with more chats about the books of blood and films and cinema. Anything else that springs to mind, I'm sure. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye for now.